Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fall 2020 meeting of the Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment. It is good to see all of you. I'm delighted to report that despite the challenging circumstances we have all been experiencing, this Advisory Committee has done an amazing job staying engaged and focused on the Chairman's objectives. I have bi-weekly meetings with staff from the Industry Analysis Division, and I spend a good part of each of these meetings listening to all the activities that you all have been involved in. You all are truly unstoppable. In particular, I would like to commend your intrepid leaders, Anna Gomez, Chair of the committee, and Heather Gates, Vice Chair. Thank you both for your phenomenal efforts. And I would also like to thank the working group chairs and each member of the working groups for your tremendous energy and intelligence that you are bringing to these important issues. We are halfway through the committee's 2-year term, so I'm excited to hear about what you have gathered. Today, we will receive reports from the committee's 3 working groups. The 3 working groups are Access to Capital, Digital Empowerment and Inclusion, and Diversity in the Tech Sector. Before we get to your reports, Chairman Pai is going to give some welcoming remarks. Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you to our incredible Media Bureau Chief, Michelle Carey, for that kind introduction. And thanks to all of you for being on the call. When I last spoke to you, it was the first time the Advisory Committee had met virtually since the COVID-19 pandemic back on April 28th, if I remember correctly. I'd certainly hoped that the next meeting would be in person because it's great to see all of you around the table at the FCC's headquarters, but I nonetheless appreciate that each of you and your organizations have been working through the disruptions caused by the pandemic and are focusing on the important work of this committee because I know that you care about it just as much as we do. I know you're also dealing with unique challenges, including the start of the school year and other family challenges that I'm facing as well. So I want to again say thank you so much for the hard work you're putting in despite the circumstances. As Michelle did, I also want to thank our incredible leaders of the Diversity Committee, Anna Gomez of Wiley Ryan, representing the Hispanic National Bar Association, for your continued leadership. And also want to thank our Vice Chair, Heather Gate of Connected Nation. Also want to express my gratitude to our working group chairs who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting on particular topics. Rudy Briachet from Comcast for the Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Working Group, and Caroline Beasley of the Beacon Beasley Media Group for the Access to Capital Working Group, and to Dr. Nicole Turner Lee of the Brookings Institution for the Diversity in Tech Working Group. All of you I know are doing spectacular work across those different vectors. I'd like to start by highlighting a key announcement the FCC made just last week that impacts diversity in the tech sector, which is appropriately the name of one of this committee's working groups. And for context, I'll just say, and I promise this has a point, when I moved to Washington in 1998 from New Orleans, I had sticker shock. The apartments were incredibly expensive compared to what I was used to. There was a lot of dislocation, and it was just difficult to get settled into the new job I was assuming at the Department of Justice. And that was a full-time paid position in Washington in 1998. Fast forward to 2020, and if you're a really talented student across the country looking to come to Washington for an internship, either during the summer or even during the school year, it's even more challenging without some sort of compensation or something to ease the way. And that's why I'm so excited about a recent effort that Commissioner Starks proposed and I've endorsed, and we're working together on it, the Early Career Staff Diversity Initiative. And the goal of this is pretty simple: to advance equitable opportunities at the FCC for talented undergraduates and graduates and law students who might be interested in entering into the communications space. As so many of you know, internships at the FCC give students valuable experience and connections that just lead to jobs at the FCC or within the field of communications regulation. In some cases, there's just no substitute for that kind of experience, just getting to know people at the agency. Indeed, some FCC interns have risen to become FCC commissioners themselves. I believe Commissioner Carr was once an intern at the FCC. But for many students, an unpaid internship is just out of reach. There's no way you can take a job like that without some sort of compensation. And for the last several years, unfortunately, the FCC has only offered voluntary, unpaid internships. And so as a result, many otherwise qualified students might decline to pursue opportunities like that, especially those who come from underrepresented communities. And it goes without saying, as you know better than anybody, the communication sector impacts every American's ability to access affordable and reliable communications services. And so, to me at least, it's only appropriate for its employees to reflect our country's diversity and to draw from the rich fabric that our country now has. And so I hope that this FCC initiative will advance this goal. Some particulars about it: beginning in January 2021, the FCC will provide a select number of paid internships to law, graduate, or undergraduate students each semester and during the summer. The FCC will also invest additional resources to recruit students from historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, and other minority institutions to increase the diversity of the applicant pool for the Commission's internship. If you cast a broader net, you hopefully get a broader array of applicants and ultimately interns. The FCC will also increase recruitment efforts with affinity groups, such as chapters of the National Black Law Students Association and Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, just to increase awareness that these opportunities are out there and that we want to plant a flag that the FCC is a good place to start your career and to join at any time during your career. And that fits within our overall goal, or at least my overall goal for this committee. As you all know, one of the first things I did when I took this job in January 2017 was to recharter the Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment, because I believe strongly in our mission. And it's important that the FCC do its part to help advance the goals of the committee, the noble goals that you're trying to advance. And so I'm grateful to Commissioner Starks for his leadership, to Bill Davenport, his Chief of Staff, for working with our team to set it up. And it's a real pleasure to work with him. And I'll simply say with a little bit of parochial pride that it took a couple of Kansans to get this ball rolling, and hopefully that ball rolls throughout every nook and cranny of this country. This initiative will coincide very nicely, I think, with the Diversity and Tech Working Groups initiative, the planned forum in January on how high school students and college students can prepare academically for technology positions by taking AP courses or STEM courses and the like, as well as by participating in internships like those offered at the FCC. Once you get it on people's radar when they're in high school or even younger potentially, then you start to see the pipeline widen, and that's a great thing for us and for everybody in the country. And to me, at least, the COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated, as nothing has before, in my view, the importance of connectivity, especially for underrepresented communities. And so I just want to close where I started by expressing my gratitude for the committee and for the working groups for continuing to help the FCC focus on this issue, as well as the government writ large, and to think strategically about how to make sure that we draw talent from every part of this country, no matter where you are, what you look like. We want you to be able to participate in the digital economy as a participant as opposed to a spectator. Also want to thank our FCC staff who are working, our DFOs, really an important job in making sure that we connect with those of the agency and those on the diversity committee. And you're the unsung heroes of the work. Also, Jeff Reardon and the OMR staff for helping to set this up in a virtual environment. I know it's a challenge, and I don't know how we would have done it 10 years ago, but thanks to your hard work, although it's not optimal, we'd prefer to meet in person. Getting to see everybody virtually is a pleasure. So thanks to everyone for the great work. I wish you some smooth and strong deliberations today, and hope you have a great Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your remarks and for being with us today. In fact, I believe that you have participated in every single meeting that this committee has had since it was rechartered a few years ago. And I think that demonstrates the importance that you place on the work of this committee. So thank you for once again participating. Next, I would like to echo the chairman's thanks to our DFOs, the indefatigable Jameel Best-Johnson and Julie Saulnier and Jameel Cadre. I know that this has been a particularly challenging environment for you all to be coordinating with the committee, and you have done a fabulous job. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Jameel Best-Johnson.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning and welcome to the September 18th meeting of the Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment of the Federal Communications Commission. We are greatly indebted to the talented professionals who serve on this federal advisory committee, which keeps the FCC focused on issues of broadband access and adoption, media ownership diversity, employment in tech, and entrepreneurship in a digital economy. In ordinary times, these are very serious issues to grapple with. Against the current backdrop of conversations about inequity and injustice across many strands of American life, the work we're engaged in takes on increased urgency. Because of the dedication of the members of this advisory committee, today we're able to report on initiatives and programs that we hope will move the needle forward, resulting in greater access to a range of opportunities for everyone. We will now have welcome remarks from Julie Saulnier, Deputy Designated Federal Officer. Julie? We can come back to Julie. She may be having a technical difficulty. We'll now have brief welcome remarks from Jameel Cadre, Deputy Designated Federal Officer. Jameel?
Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank all of our members and our leadership in particular for all of the fantastic work that you've been doing. You had already been doing that before, but somehow you've even stepped up your efforts even more in this challenging environment, which, as everyone else has alluded to, is just incredibly impressive. So just thank you again for your continued commitment. It's been a real pleasure to work with you. And thank you to everyone that is tuning in today to hear about your work. I know it'll be a very informative experience.
Thank you, Jameel. Julie, are you able to join us? Okay, we'll turn to Julie a little bit later in the meeting. So we do thank Chairman Pai and Media Bureau Chief Michelle Carey for speaking to the committee today. And now Committee Chair Ana Gomez will gavel the meeting to order and preside over the agenda. Good morning, Ana.
Good morning, Jamila. First of all, thank you to Chairman Pai and Michelle for joining us today and for giving us your remarks. We do appreciate your support. I'd like to thank you both as well for your support and help in releasing the June 11 Advisory Committee Statement on Civil Rights Demonstrations and the Racial Divide, in which we stated that recurring racial violence and hostility against the Black community, compounded by the disparate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on communities of color, have laid bare the age-old social, health, and economic inequities and systemic racism that continue throughout the country. So thank you again for your help and support. I'd also like to commend the Chairman and Commissioner Starks for spearheading the Internship Diversity Initiative that the Chairman talked about just now. So this is our second full ACDDE meeting during the pandemic, and most of us continue to work from home along with our families and are relying on communications for work, school, information, even social contact. Yet disparities in access to communications continue to exist across our communities. So the importance of our work has not diminished, and our work certainly has not stopped. I am extremely proud of the work that our working groups have done in the past few months, in spite of the challenges that we are currently facing. And that work is important, ensuring that everyone has access to high-speed broadband, to all communications, including tech companies, companies reflect a diverse and inclusive workforce and suppliers, and that broadcasters have access to capital so that they can continue to provide the local content on which their communities rely. So you will be hearing from our three working groups, and I can tell you they are hard at work to fulfill the committee's mission, and they have been creative, they have been resilient, and they have been flexible. I have been highly impressed by the working group chair's leadership, and I am grateful to everyone for their passion and their dedication. And finally, I have to say thank you to the intrepid 3Js, Jamila Best-Johnson, Jameel Cadre, and Julie Saulnier for your guidance, support, and your patience. Heather, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Sure. Thank you, Anna. Looking at my comments, I'm like, man, Anna and I think alike. I'd like to begin by thanking Chairman Pai and Michelle for your support and for joining us today. I also want to acknowledge my fellow committee members and commission staff and members of the public today. Well, folks, 2020 has turned out to be a pretty challenging year. When we last met in April, we talked about the COVID crisis. I guess we were in the second month of the crisis, and how it exposed the digital divide to people that were outside of our communications and telecommunications world. It also showed them how it disproportionately affected disadvantaged and underrepresented communities. We saw schools scramble to get kids devices and hotspots, and we saw libraries scramble to continue to provide critical services to the community, some of which rely on the library for digital literacy training and other ways of bridging the digital divide. A couple of weeks ago, I saw an image of 2 children sitting out on the pavement outside of Taco Bell in order to access free Wi-Fi, and that image stuck with me. It's a constant reminder that we have work to do. Children shouldn't have to sit on the pavement in order to be able to participate in learning. As if 2020 couldn't get any tougher, we were confronted with the killing of George Floyd and the resulting civil rights demonstration. I am extremely grateful that our group was able to get together and release a statement which helped to reaffirm our commitment to assisting the Commission in their efforts to expand digital equity and empower diverse communities in order to spur education, economic development, and civil development. In that spirit, I'm looking forward to our discussion today. The working groups have done a lot of work that we can be proud of and continue to engage in activities that will lead to policies, practices, and create opportunities for universal broadband and a diverse workforce and increased supply of diversity, particularly in this environment when it's much needed. Lastly, I'd like to thank Anna for her leadership. I only can look up to you, Anna. The working group chairs and related sub-chairs that have worked tremendously hard to put together events that have the library workshop that's taken place and other events that are coming up and other activities that are ongoing right now. So again, I would like to thank the DFOs. As Anna said, they keep us moving along and show a lot of patience in working with many professionals from different organizations. So I appreciate this time, and I look forward to a great discussion and inter-working group feedback.
Thank you, Heather. Heather, you have been a fantastic vice chair. We are so lucky to have you and your tremendous expertise and leadership as well.
Thank you, Anna.
And with that, I formally call this meeting to order. So first we'll take the roll call. As I call your name, please unmute yourself and let us know that you're on. Raul Alarcon. Susan Allen.
Present.
Carolyn Beasley.
Here.
Cindy Benavides. Laura Baracall.
Present.
Maria Brennan. Rudy Brioche.
Here.
Cindy, I see that you're present. Thank you.
I'm here, and I just have a 3- and 5-year-old behind me.
Rudy, you said here, right?
Yep.
Harin Contractor,
I'm here, thank you.
Skip Dillard. I saw you earlier, Skip.
Here.
Okay. Michelle Duke,
Here.
Debbie Elam.
Deborah, yes, good morning, I'm here.
Sorry, Deborah.
That's quite all right.
Marita Coley,
Here.
Rashidi Hendricks,
Present.
David Honig, Ron Johnson,
Anna?
Here.
And, excuse me, this is Jamila. I believe David has some technical difficulty. He's present, but he's watching the live stream.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamila. Sherman Kizart. I saw you earlier too.
Present.
All right, Nicole Turner Lee,
Present.
Roy Litland,
Here.
Juwan McCoy,
Here.
Clint Odom,
Clint is here.
yeah, I saw him earlier. All right, Sean Perryman, I see Henry Rivera,
Yes, here.
Stephen Roberts, Brian Scarpelli, Dr. Shukla, I saw Clint is present. And Raul, I see you're present too. Thank you. Where was I? Dr. Shukla, did you respond? Marie Silla? Janelle Trigg?
Good morning, present.
Morning. James Winston? And Chris Wood?
Present.
Felicia West is also present.
Thank you, Felicia.
Rosa Mendoza is also here.
Hi, Rosa.
Fallon Wilson is also present.
Hi, Dr. Wilson. Did I miss anyone else? All right. Thank you very much.
Anna, are you calling all the groups? This is Nahuja. I didn't hear you call my name.
So this was the committee.
Okay.
But thank you, Nahuja, and your great room.
And Anna, excuse me, this is Jamila. Shelley Blakeney, alternate for T-Mobile, is present as well. She's Marie Silla's alternate.
Thank you.
So T-Mobile is in attendance today.
Great. And I see Clint also. All right. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into our working group presentations. Rudy Brioche would lead our first working group, the Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Working Group presentation. Rudy, I turn this over to you. If everyone could please turn off your mics and your videos. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna.
It's a pleasure to once again be with all my colleagues, part of the Diversity Committee. The Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Working Group is pleased to provide this report, this update to the Commission, to the public, to give you a sense of the progress that we've done thus far. But first, I wanted to start off by at least introducing and saying good morning to my fellow colleagues, members of the Working Group on Digital Empowerment and Inclusion. This group is made up of an impressive collection of public and private leaders who are from the, from civil society, companies, government agencies. This collaboration of this rather diverse group has produced not only the materials that we're going to review today, but also the statement on civil rights demonstrations and racial divide that Anna referenced, and that was released this past summer. The Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Working Group are proud members of the Advisory Committee, and our work focuses on adoption. As our name indicates, we are the Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Committee, and thus we are charged to look at the FCC's charge of promoting digital empowerment and inclusion. The way we divide our work into two subgroups. The first subgroup focuses on inclusion, and there we focus on broadband access, broadband adoption, and broadband use. The other half of the group focuses on empowerment. And there we focus on opportunities to ensure that broadband, new technologies are available to all sectors and all segments of our economy and society. Each of those segments are actually rather important in order for us to achieve our work. And that work is to promote and to help society achieve universal digital access and use across the board. And that's important. So the major goals of the working group are to identify barriers. These are barriers to adoption, barriers to use of advanced communications. And the way we interpret advanced communication is not limited to broadband. It includes access to computing devices, to laptops, to smartphones, to tools that will enable both businesses and individuals to achieve their greatest potential. It also includes access and use to other forms of technology such as coding, artificial intelligence. This global, broad, holistic use and understanding of advanced technologies is really important to our work. Secondly, our goal is to develop mechanisms to ensure that these diverse and economically challenged communities are not denied the wide range of opportunities from education to economic mobility, healthcare access, civic participation, and the list indeed goes on and on. I'd like to at least give a quick highlight of each of the subgroups, and then our respective chairs will go into more detail. On the digital inclusion side, that subgroup is focused on building and working to make sure that we are actually building on the various work that previous iterations of this working group worked on. We're truly examining the human part of the digital divide. We're assessing strategies to overcome barriers of adoption and use of, again, not just broadband, but all advanced communications as discussed earlier. A quick note on how we're looking at adoption. Previously, we focused a lot on access, and access is usually used in fact rather synonymous with adoption. But we want to make sure that in this particular context, when we discuss adoption, we're not discussing the access or the deployment of broadband or other forms of advanced communications. Instead, we're really focusing on the human adoption, the human use and consumption of these forms of services. According to some key stats that we all have and we all know well, 85% of households subscribe to internet service. 73% of U.S. households subscribe to some form of fixed or internet connection. Now, these stats are important because based on data from both the FCC and from other sources, the share of Americans who have access to fixed broadband service but do not subscribe is in fact 5 times greater than those who do not have access to broadband. So approximately 5% of those who don't have access compared to 27% who don't subscribe to the services that they have. We think that's important for us to focus on this adoption story and to see how we can help facilitate and to encourage greater adoption of services that are there, that are present. The Broadband Adoption Workshop is one of the ways in which that this committee has tried to focus on this issue and to help develop recommendations and a report that we will work on in the next half of this year. In the workshop, which will go into more detail, I won't steal the thunder of any of my co-chairs, but we focused on the roles of U.S. libraries. We think U.S. libraries are extremely important. They serve as an anchor institution and a key driver for broadband adoption. We want to examine to see what are some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that libraries are facing as they help individuals gain access and adoption to broadband. One of the ways in which that we know that libraries do this is that they don't do it alone. They partner with other organizations, and we think these partnerships, whether it's public-private partnerships or it's public-public partnerships, we think all of these partnerships are important, and looking at them in a systemic way to identify best practices is an important part of our work. And of course, our work wouldn't mean anything if we are not facing and addressing the realities of today. And the COVID pandemic has changed a lot that we're experiencing in society. So it's important for us to understand how broadband continues to help and how, in fact, the lack of access, the lack of adoption increases in existing disparities as a result of the pandemic. The other part of the working group focuses on empowerment. And empowerment is important. We view empowerment from the standpoint of how do we increase opportunities for small businesses to gain economic opportunities to the information, communications, and technology sector. The chairman mentioned earlier opportunities that even the FCC is looking, and we think that's actually very important, and we credit the FCC and compliment the chairman and particularly Commissioner Starks for launching this important initiative. Expanding opportunities to information, such as the incredible information that the FCC has as far as how it regulates industries, how it regulates this marketplace, is extremely important. And opening that opportunity for students of all backgrounds to gain access is important. We adopt a very similar approach in the digital empowerment subgroup by looking to see how we can break down barriers for small businesses to gain access to opportunities within this highly robust marketplace, this sector broadly defined as the information, communication, and technology sector. And we're going to do this in a couple of ways. One is through a showcase that is upcoming in October. We'll discuss that in more detail. And then a larger event in the future, which will similarly be an opportunity for both small businesses, diverse businesses, to connect with opportunities from the corporate sector in order for them to meet mutually and for there to be mutual gain, which we believe there are plenty. So without ado, let me turn to our co-chairs. Our first presenter is going to be Irene Contractor and Laura Berkholz, who will discuss our digital inclusion subgroup, which there focuses a great deal on the library engagement that we've been doing for the past several months and the great work that we have ahead of us. So without further ado, Hareen, Laura, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rudy. Really appreciate the context and introduction. Don't want to reiterate what a lot has been said here, but we wanted to really explore this idea of libraries advancing broadband adoption and use, and especially for digital skills. And we had this topic even before COVID-19 hit and just made this work all the more important. So go to the next slide, please. All right, great. So we had two panels on this workshop. The key was trying to address how U.S. libraries can work to bridge the digital divide and work with communities to provide more access to adoption. This was pretty critical. As Rudy mentioned, they're anchor institutions. The first panel represented here are libraries serving a cross-section of U.S. communities. We looked at urban communities, we looked at rural communities, we looked at associations, so a lot of these folks were cross-cutting, and that was purposeful. One thing that we found, and some of these even work in tribal areas, one thing that we found is that a lot of these folks have some very common and similar challenges, but there was a lot of opportunity. We'll get into takeaways in a minute, but it's pretty clear, and I called this out in the workshop itself, but libraries are magicians. They're asked to do a lot with very little. And so I was honored to co-moderate this with Marika Visser, who is a senior policy advocate for the American Libraries Association. ALA is a critical institution that provides a lot of access to information, grants, and best practices to the library community. So she provided a lot of great information and resources as we were trying to dig into some of the more unique issues facing each of these libraries. And so we were amazed to have such amazing panelists, not because that they're well-known subject matter experts, but because they're on the ground doing the hard work. And sometimes we all get caught up looking at the data or reading stories, and we miss out on what's actually happening on the ground. And this is what was so critical here, because these folks are just telling us what they're doing with Scotch tape and Band-Aids to keep this thing going. And before I kind of get to takeaways, I think we're going to get the next slide. It was critical that we talked about the libraries piece, but also the partners piece. And so Laura's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Hareen. So good morning. My name is Laura Barraquah, and I'm a co-lead for the DEI Working Group's Digital Inclusion Subgroup. Picking up on where Hareen left off, the second part of our August 3rd Libraries Workshop, it examined community and public-private partnerships. So really the goal of this panel was to explore how libraries are partnering with community organizations and improving opportunities for digital inclusion. That's really been the focus from the start. So through this session, we were able to learn more about what partnership models between libraries and community organizations actually look like. So we heard from several community organizations, as you see here in the PowerPoint slide that you're viewing. And they had the opportunity to discuss their partnership work with libraries. In addition, we were really able to dig a little deeper on the importance of capacity building and what this means for libraries, especially during a pandemic. I think that was definitely an issue that was front and center for this panel. And specifically, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, for example, made several points around how their programs work, how their funding works, and they discussed how oftentimes smaller libraries don't have the internal bandwidth to navigate the grant-making opportunities and implement programs as well as maybe larger public libraries can. So with that said, I think the questions are, how do we ensure that library services and programs that are offering access to critical digital tools and resources and training, how do we make sure they're reaching the communities that they should be reaching, the communities with greatest need? And I think another area that we will continue to explore is what role can partnerships play in advancing capacity building and better positioning libraries as anchor institutions for broadband adoption and digital training. So these are areas that our working group will continue to explore in the coming weeks and months. And I think, now that we've kind of gone through both sessions, I'll turn it back to Hareen so he can actually dig a little deeper on some of the additional takeaways and the workshop findings. So Hareen.
Yep, thanks, Laura. So one thing that was very evident is that connectivity was a major issue for these libraries, particularly in areas where broadband is not seen as very rapidly deployed. It's challenging for the libraries like staff to stay connected with their patrons. One thing they told us was that they don't want to worry about connectivity. They want to focus on doing the work for the community through their programs, career services, research need, and providing efforts for those whose English is not their first language. But they too often have to work on the connectivity piece to even get engaged with their communities. And so that was one of the major takeaways. We're like, take this off our plate so we can actually do our job. You know, one thing that we learned from some of these panelists was they are the first point of contact for career resources. They are the first point of contact for some STEM introductions for students who are not from well-privileged backgrounds. They are the first point of contact for those whose English is not their first language. So they serve critical institutions, and you have people who are supporting all these things, also trying to provide connectivity to their patrons. And that was one thing that was like, please just handle this so we can handle everything else. Obviously, COVID-19 has created additional challenges, and they're working on different ways to continue to keep connected to their patrons, either through hotspot lending programs, providing hotspots 24/7 in their parking lots, doing virtual workshops to keep connected to their patrons and through their programs, doing digital literacy training. They're doing a lot with less. And as COVID-19 continues to hinder our economic progress, they're going to be more cash-strapped. These local and state funding institutions are going to diminish in what they can provide, and libraries are often the first to get hit. And that was one thing they wanted us to know on the national side is like, please help us find additional resources. One thing that Laura will talk about the important role of IMLS in a second in terms of breaking down some of the asymmetry information. But that was one of the reasons we wanted to talk to libraries and partners, was to figure out how we can target resources and expand to different places. Laura will talk about next steps in a few, but this workshop was great. It was great to talk to frontline library leaders and frontline partners. One thing we're going to focus on more is we've done a couple of additional conversations, follow up with some of the members that Laura's going to talk about, but we're going to start doing some more cross-cutting conversations and really trying to dive into what might be concrete recommendations, either from the bully pulpit of the FCC or recommendations that nonprofit institutions and maybe corporations can do to help amplify some of the great work libraries are already trying to do. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Hareen. Yeah, and for IMLS, I think we had a lot of really good conversation with them and understanding how their grant making processes work and how that information is shared with libraries. So that is one follow-up that we plan to continue kind of pursuing. But our working group generally plans to do additional follow-up with several of our library workshop panelists. We'd like to dig a little deeper with our experts to supplement the workshop takeaways that we already have. In addition, we will be digging deeper into tribal libraries to better understand the complexities there. Our working group to date has already met with the FCC's Office of Native Affairs and Policy, known as ONAP, and we also plan to have some follow-up discussions related to tribal with them. The American Library Association, as well as the Arizona State Library, have been very resourceful. They've shared background for our research, and we anticipate that they will continue to be a resource to us. And we're also identifying additional experts to speak with and learn more about the unique challenges that are facing tribal libraries and communities. So, I think we have a lot of follow-up to do. Once we are able to have these conversations, we will then begin to put pen to paper and further develop our final report, which will focus on ways in which libraries are really helping to bridge the digital divide, foster greater digital inclusion, and just serve as community hubs for digital adoption and literacy. So that's kind of our plan, and I will stop there and I guess hand it off to Janelle Trigg, unless Hareen, you have anything else to add.
I think the only thing I would add is thank you for everyone in the working group for their hard work on providing the questions, participating in the workshop, the FCC staff, the Jays for really supporting this effort. It was difficult with the virtual environment and the amount of speakers we had, but we did our best, and that's just a testament to how passionate people are trying to address this issue.
Yeah, and also big thanks to our leadership, to Anna Gomez and to Heather Gates and to Rudy Brioche, because they are hands-on in our workshop, in our working group, as well as other working groups. Now, Rudy has to be part of ours because he's our chair, but for her, but for Anna and for Heather, we really appreciate the commitment to the work that our working group is doing. So thank you.
Well, great. Thank you very much. That's Janelle, who needs no introduction.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you to everyone. Good morning. I'll also express my appreciation to Anna, Heather, and Rudy for their visionary leadership and support. I'd also like to give special thanks to my wonderful co-chair and dear friend, Susan Allen, who is the National President, CEO for the United States Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce. Susan and I are very appreciative to the work of our great planning committee, a joint partnership with our members of our DEI working group, the Diversity in Tech Sector working group, and the FCC's Office of Communications Business Opportunities, OCBO. We're delighted to again work with OCBO and its director, Sanford Williams, and his staff. We give special thanks to our DFOs, the 3 J's, as mentioned, Jamila, Julie, and Jameel, for keeping us on track. Your support is much appreciated. We also want to recognize another important partner in this effort, the Internet Association. Due to the generous support of Sean Perriman, who's Director, Social Impact Policy and Counsel for the Internet Association and a member of the Diversity in Tech Working Group, IA will host our very first supplier diversity event. Sean is also a member of our planning committee, and through his effort, several of his members will also participate in our first event, and we hope our major symposium as well. You will see the 2 goals on the screen on the PowerPoint. At our meeting in April, we presented a plan to meet these 2 primary objectives for DCBs, and I think it's important to define diverse communications businesses. Diverse in this context means any business or entrepreneur involved in legacy or traditional and newer communications industries. That includes radio, television, satellite, cable, internet, across the board, at any stage of development, whether they are a new entrant, mid-stage, or larger company. Small businesses would be defined under the U.S. Small Business Administration or a state agency, or the FCC size standards. A DCB is also a woman-owned or minority ethnic-owned business, LGBTQ-owned, veteran-owned, any other diverse classification. And communications businesses includes, as I mentioned, businesses and entrepreneurs that are involved in communications media companies, as well as tech-oriented industries. We proposed at that time that the FCC present 2 public events that would help DCBs assess the current state of technology, as well as trends and technological advances, the necessary skill sets and personnel to utilize such technology, and opportunities for employment or partnership. We proposed a smaller event that would showcase available resources and technology trends to help DCB short and long term, and a foundational event. It would be a foundational event for a more traditional symposium later in the year. And then the second event would be a full day symposium. Of course, the world has changed since February when we first started working on our plan, certainly since April when we first presented this, and the needs and opportunities available to DCBs have changed dramatically due to COVID-19. So we have had to reassess our schedule, the timing, topics, and information that we believe will be helpful for DCBs in today's time. We too have had to pivot. So we're very proud to introduce our first Supplier Diversity Showcase, which will be on October the 23rd. Next slide, please. This event has three primary objectives: to provide support, to engage the tech sector, and to assess COVID-19 impact. All three of these are important because it is a different world, as I mentioned. Access to capital remains a major issue for any size business, large, small, mid-size, and certainly DCBs. The tech sector is critically important because technology has never been more important. Everything we do to survive during this pandemic and to thrive in our businesses, in our home life, everything we do is somehow associated with advances in technology. And the digital ever before is mentioned by Laura and Hareen. So we need to also look at not just the digital divide, but the opportunity divide. DCBs need assistance in employment, in management, in ownership, supplier diversity, access to capital, everything across the board. And of course, the COVID-19 impact is paramount. It has affected businesses, small businesses in particular, like no other. And I'd like Susan, my co-chair, to expound a little bit on that. In her travels and interaction with her members across the country, she has her feet on the ground and has a unique perspective of real world impact of the ongoing pandemic. Susan?
Thank you, Janelle. I'm pleased to join all of you and share my experiences. So that's my job. I travel around the country. Since March, I stopped and I have been traveling on the internet, talking to our members from the east to the west and north to south. And this is what I found. And just to give you some perspective of how deep we have fallen in the small business community. Before COVID-19, the small and diverse business community still today made up of 90% of American businesses. And the African-American small business, for example, were up 400% in 1 year in their formation and prosperity, 400%. They were doing very well in Texas, Georgia, California, Florida, North Carolina. And, but COVID-19 came and it put us into big stop, big halt. The social distancing, the lockdown has affected the most folks who are in the small and diverse businesses, who are 64% or more of them are in the customer-facing type of industry, hospitality, travel, food services, shops, and you name it. As a result, we found out that 40% of Asian American businesses have closed down. 50% of Hispanic businesses have closed down. 64% of African American businesses said that they are not sure they will come back and reopen again. That is devastating, ladies and gentlemen. And so when the PPP money came down to the economy, because it came down so fast, in such a hurry to help the small business community and American workers stay afloat, there was not a well thought out distribution system. The small business and diverse business owners do not have that knowledge or the basic skill that a more established mainstream business have in working with the banks, a traditional bank, in applying for the PPP loan. They also do not trust the government's red tape, and they were also busy trying to keep the business afloat. So the bottom line is they are in a hole and they needed to get help. And we're now waiting for the PPP money to be renewed, hopefully. We have had the first $2.6 billion down for signed into law on March 27, and we need more. Even the small businesses and minority businesses who were able to get the PPP money, they only get it for 2.5 months. And that was in March, April, and May. How about June, July, and August, and now September? They use that money to keep their employees to avoid furloughing or layoffs. But after that, they have to cough out money from their own reserves. And many of the small businesses have only 30 to 60 days of cash balance to make their payroll and the fixed overhead. It's a very sad story. 1 million minority-owned businesses that employed 7 million employees out of 115 employees hired by businesses in the country, producing 1.4 trillion receipts. The last census data was available, has dropped down substantially. And that's what COVID-19 has done to all of us.
Thank you, Susan. Next slide, please. Given the backdrop that Susan has laid out, and we all know of businesses, large and small, that are suffering, we thought it was important to expand our first showcase, certainly longer than the 2 hours we had initially planned. So we're looking at a 3-hour event that will include a very wide variety of speakers to address 2 important sessions. The one session would be access to capital. The second session will talk about opportunities for DCBs. But it's important that our speakers include a cross-section of all types of specialists, experts, and entities that can provide information, resources that DCBs need today and that DCBs will need tomorrow. So I'm delighted to announce that we have full participation from the United States Small Business Administration. I'm an alumnus of the SBA, and they will talk about not just the traditional forms of capital that are available through the SBA, but some of the new initiatives that they are announcing and they are implementing for small minority women-owned businesses. We have a range of financial institutions, those that are using fintech, CDFI institutions, venture capital investors. There's still a need for venture capital and private equity for DCBs that want to launch more aggressively. But there's also a need for traditional banks, as well as community-oriented banks. Technology companies will talk about the new initiatives and programs that they have instituted since COVID-19, as well as resources for capital. There is money out there for DCBs. We're delighted that communications and media companies will also share information and resources and new supplier diversity efforts. Not-for-profit organizations that are engaged in workforce training, as well as overall needs of DCBs for supplier diversity. And of course, public interest and civil rights organizations. It certainly will take a village for us to survive the pandemic and for DCBs to even exist after the pandemic. And we're pleased to have support across the board. Next slide, please. I mentioned that access to capital was important. We have an expanded session on Show Me the Money, Traditional and Alternative Sources of Capital. I've said years ago at a FCC supplier diversity event, in fact, that access to capital was the number 1, number 2, and number 3 market entry barrier for small businesses. It's even more so today. And because of the uncertain state of the economy and continuing pandemic, DCBs are struggling to survive for those that still exist. We felt it was critical to showcase both a traditional and alternative sources of financial report, including trends and technology that will impact capital resources. So as I mentioned before, our speakers include representatives from fintech and tech sector companies, community banks, organizations, private equity, venture capital, and the Small Business Administration. Next slide, please. Next slide. Well, I'll let the slide catch up a little bit. Session 2 is how to pivot in a COVID-19 world, opportunities and reinvention strategies for diverse communications businesses. DCBs have not just a digital divide for some that don't have access to broadband or have limited access to high-speed broadband, but also have an opportunity divide. It's critically important for DCBs to have not just access to capital, but access to opportunities. And that includes supplier diversity management, employment, new programs that may do training for some of the updated technology. Large businesses also recognize the need to be more sensitive to issues facing minority communities and businesses, and have launched new programs and initiatives that promote diversity, inclusion in the workforce, as well as increases in supplier vendor pool and customers. This session, we're very proud to have a wide range of speakers that includes not just tech companies, but media companies, supplier diversity specialists, and an overview of what DCBs really need, what they have to do to pivot, to reinvent themselves, to consider moving forward. Some DCBs may need to even invest in new goods and services or change their business plans. We hope to provide information on how to do that, how to assess whether you have to do that, and certainly what steps you can take moving forward. Susan, if you could just speak briefly on the DCB need to pivot and to reinvent themselves.
You know, Janelle, it's not just the DCB, everybody in this whole new world got to do that, even big corporations. I work with major corporations, the Fortune 500, Fortune 50 corporation. They also are doing a lot of deep research and also soul searching as to the supply chain. How do they avoid being dependent on one major supplier in the world? How do they integrate their supply chain, their purchasing policy into this new world? So for the DCB who are at the bottom of the food chain, and they need to follow the money and look at what the major corporations who are the purchasers of products and services, just like the federal government. That's why federal contracts are also very important in the work we have here at the FCC. The DCB got to look at follow the money. They also have to change the mindset. Don't be afraid about asking for help. Don't be afraid of coming out and say, I don't understand, because more people do not understand what they have to do in the future than you know, or than they can commit or admit. I think that nowadays, Janelle, the policymakers begin to not just understand, but appreciate the economic power impact the small and diverse businesses have on the American economy. They truly are the engines that run the American economy. Without them, look at what we have done, we have here. Last night, I was driving around looking for a place to eat with my staff. The whole town was closed. There's no place to eat at 8:30 in the evening. I think the DCB ought to be creative, innovative. First, health is important. Take care of themselves, take care of the employees, and get the government, work with us to get the government to provide some liability protection from being sued for any illness or harm that's caused to the employees that they need so badly to help them reignite their own engine. Go to talk to your competitors and watch what they do. Research. There's so much information out on the internet that it will give you great ideas. I just read this morning that some companies have moved from the tourist district, into the local area, and they have increased $50 million sales to $60 million sales because they no longer have the tourists to buy from them. They're now selling local. People are going out to eat. They're not going to travel. They're going to go to the local market. So be creative, and that's what DCB need to do. Don't be afraid of asking questions. Don't be afraid of saying that I don't know. How do I do that? And also learn where the money is. As you said, don't just rely on the traditional banks. Go to the minority banks. Go to the CDFIs. Go to crowdfunding. There are plenty of opportunities there. And if they need help, just go to the FCC website, and we have plenty of resources, lead to the resources for you all.
Thank you, Susan. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that. OCBO has graciously agreed to post some of the links and resources that we'll provide as part of this showcase. And we hope to have a one-stop shop for DCBs to be able to access not just some of the speakers, but the programs, the available resources, links to loan applications, links to information about workforce training across the board. This session will also include some successful DCBs who have pivoted and some best practices, as well as some things to look out for. What we want to do with this showcase overall is to provide resources, information, as well as assistance for DCBs to prepare to move forward. And those DCBs that wish to shift and to pivot and be creative, as Susan said, and reinvent themselves, can make some decisions and some changes and in line for the larger symposium that would be, we hope, in the spring, hopefully in person at the FCC. So we want to give DCBs news that they can use to move forward. Next slide, please. Our work right now for the fall of 2020, of course, we will complete our planning for the showcase in October. We will conduct a post-analysis of that showcase so we can also plan for the 2021 event. We hope that the speakers that will join us for this showcase in October will also consider joining us for the spring, for the larger event. So for spring 2021, we want to work on the layout, the plan for the symposium, confirm the roles of both our working group, the DEI working group, and diversity in tech, as well as FCC personnel. We will, of course, convene the 2021 Technology Opportunities Symposium, which will include a networking opportunity, a speed dating type of opportunity, which we've done successfully in the past few symposiums, where at the end of the substantive sessions, DCBs will have an opportunity to meet with some of the speakers, larger companies looking for hiring DCBs, both for supplier diversity or for partnerships and innovative programs, and DCBs that want to introduce themselves to tech companies and get some feedback on what they should do moving forward. And we will, of course, develop the final report of our 2020 Opportunity Showcase and 21 Symposium. We want to have findings, outcomes, and recommendations on how we have served DCBs, as well as moved the needle forward when it comes to diversity among supplier diversity programs and increased opportunities for DCBs. So thank you very much. If you have ideas for our 2021 symposium, we certainly welcome them. And of course, we can take any questions or comments regarding this presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you very much for that fabulous presentation. Thank you, Susan, as well, and also to our, to our other co-chairs for their presentation, Hareen and Laura. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are additional members of the working group who have been integral in this entire process. I'd like to recognize specifically, Sydney Bevides from LULAC, Roy Litland from Verizon, and also Marie Silla from Dish, as well as Shelley Blakely from Dish as well. And finally, but certainly not least, Felicia West from the Public Service Commission of Washington, D.C. I'd like to invite those members to be part of the question and answering session, and to also chime in, supplement comments that we've already made, so we can make sure that we capture the views of all members of this working group. So for now, are there any, do we have any questions at all? If not, I'd like to turn to maybe a couple of additional comments from our members or co-chairs. And I do have a couple of questions, but don't want to monopolize all of this airtime. Okay, if that's the case, I'd like to maybe recognize Roy, who is from Verizon, who is integrally involved in both sides of the shop with our digital inclusion work and also our digital empowerment work. If he has any comments he would like to make. No?
Yeah, this is Roy Hayes. Sorry, I've got an issue with my video. It's not working. But no, it's been a pleasure to work with everyone, and I look forward to continuing our efforts and delivering a good final work product that moves the ball forward on these important issues.
Great. Okay. And I'll be going online. I'll give Sydney a chance to settle the little ones. So this is T-minus 2 people. Let me turn to Felicia West, who is the co-moderator of the second panel of the library digital broadband adoption workshop, who's from as I said before, the Public Service Commission in DC. Really an important part of the overall ecosystem. Felicia, we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in on either side of our shops here.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have been a part of the working group and the presentation we made in August. Thank you, Rudy, Laura, who was a co-moderator with me, and Harin and his co-moderator. I think what we have done has been exponentially great. And what I mean by that, as has been highlighted, we are all in a very critical time in our nation, our communities, and so forth. And I think, one of the things that I think is, as Laura highlighted, is what are we doing to increase the capacity, in particular, of the broadband adoption piece of those needs that are critically needed. And it was very interesting to see the number of participants for that particular of the library public-private partnerships. And I think, as was highlighted, it's so critical, the role that libraries serve as anchor institutions. And I think, part of what we've saw and seen in our research is how can we build that with the greatest capacity and momentum, to leverage now and then post-COVID. As we know, COVID has created a number of challenges, and it was very interesting to see how, the libraries are trying to, make the difference. I remember in particular, there was a story that was shared about how students were actually coming to the library, sitting outside using, and accessing the Wi-Fi. And, that seems very non-traditional in thinking. But, one thing that we saw in the discussion is that we have to be very creative going forward. We have to be very deliberate in identifying those partners, some of which may not be traditional. I know one of the entities shared that they had actually partnered with social organizations, you know, that providing meals, that were providing other resources to communities and how they could leverage those partnerships. And so I think, you know, the committee has done a great job in what we've done, and I'm just excited about what we would do and what our research will show going forward and even in post-COVID.
Well, thank you very much, Felicia. Very much appreciate those comments and observations. Shelley Blakely from T-Mobile, in the event that you're on, would like to acknowledge you as well. Okay. All right, let's turn to Sydney from LULAC, who was our closer for the broadband adoption library workshop. Sydney, if you're available.
Great. Thank you so much, Rudy, and thank you again to all of our leadership and committee members for all the work that you're doing. Again, and looking at broadband adoption, you know, one of the issues that we see facing the Latino community in particular, and as we look at online learning and virtual learning, is that 1 in 3 Latino children do not have access to Wi-Fi and technology. And so it's very important that as we look to address this issue, that we look at adoption as well as access, informing solutions for our communities. I'm going to keep it brief just because I know we have many other committee members who will be joining. And thank you again, Rudy, for your leadership.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sydney. Madam Chair, Anna, I'll turn it over to you unless we have questions from either members of the broader committee or members of the public.
Thanks, Rudy, and thanks, Harin, Laura, Janelle, and Susan, as well as all the other wonderful working group members. Really, this has been an all hands on deck, great effort by the working group, and so much good product coming out, so many good things coming with the supplier diversity workshop and everything else. So if anybody on the full committee would like to either ask a question or this is our discussion time, I'd appreciate if you could raise your hand or send a message via the chat. And once you do that, I will call your name and then you can unmute yourself. Marita.
Hi, I just wanted to commend the committee on an incredible presentation, and particularly since we're in FCC world inside the Beltway, I'd like to commend the committee for doing the outreach with the libraries and integrating. That's so much an important part of the work that we do, but we often, you know, are talking to ourselves and not necessarily reaching out into the community. So I thought bringing in the representatives from the schools and libraries was incredible. And also the small business. I love the conclusion that access to capital is the number 1, number 2, and number 3 market entry barrier for small and disadvantaged businesses. So I really just want to commend you all for sharing this valuable information, and just incredible job. Great work you're doing.
Thank you, Marita. I thought I saw another hand up. Oh, that is Marita's hand up. Okay, sorry. Anyone else?
Madam Chairman, this is Nicole Turner Lee. I just put in the chat a reference to an article that I just wrote that highlights the importance of local partnerships in solving broadband access. I'd like to just submit that to the committee and to the public for any type of review. It actually speaks to many of the points mentioned today.
Great, thank you. You've really put out a great body of work on a lot of these issues. So we really appreciate having you as part of our committee.
And Dr. Turner Lee, if you notice, one of our next steps is to reach out to subject matter experts and to engage in collaborative conversation. You are chief among them. So this is a notice, but we understand that you're extremely busy, but you've been producing a lot of great work in this area, and it's been informing our deliberations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Heather, is there anything you'd like to add?
Hello. I don't have anything to add. This is the working group that's up my alley. So I think Rudy knows my thoughts at this point. But I'm looking forward to the continued discussion on partnerships, because as Nicole said, that's really key. As Connected Nation, as a nonprofit, that's our oxygen, working with communities, working with libraries, and working with for-profit and nonprofit and state and local communities. Those are the best projects and have the best outcomes when people come together, because at the end of the day, the libraries can't do it themselves. They have their core mission that they continue to look at, and then they provide services for all disadvantaged communities, whether disadvantaged groups, whether it's seniors or immigrants, and a lot of services. So in order for them to be successful, they rely on the partnerships to fill in those gaps. As you know, it takes a village to tackle the digital divide. That's a lesson learned and a best practice, I think. But yeah, I'm very excited about the continued conversations. And then also, I think bringing together the discussion about supply diversity and skills is really looking at both sides of the coin. It's empowering people to get the skills and then leading them down the road of entrepreneurship and building wealth in those communities. These are long-term ideas that will transform these communities from disadvantaged communities to successful communities. So I'm really, really excited about the structure that Rudy came up with for the Digital Empowerment Inclusion Working Group, because it really just tackles two very important sides of this challenge. So thank you to everybody in the group for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather Wise, as always. Rudy, we did get a question from the public. Does the group have any early ideas about what policies the FCC could enact to address connectivity issues for libraries that might become recommendations? Isn't the agency's power somewhat limited in this arena?
You know, that's interesting, because actually when it comes to, the actual authority, adoption is one of these areas where, in fact, the FCC, has not really probed. That's one of the core, that's one of the reasons why we're looking into it. A lot of the focus in policy discussions have been really on access, as far as the extent to which that carriers deploy the networks. As far as the libraries themselves, the governance process of libraries are much more disaggregated. It's not at the federal level. And so the FCC, which has many levers of kind of regulatory authority, from its core statutory authority to its ability to develop policy, primarily by using the bully pulpit, or recommending legislative changes to Congress. We're looking at this primarily from the standpoint of what can be done in the short term to have an impact, because we believe that the that the adoption gap, the adoption crisis, is one that needs a very short term approach, because that approach is something that is going to yield results. Because remember, we're looking at communities that may have actual broadband services, and there are reasons why these services are not adopted. Separate from that, there are also other more statutory-based authorities that I'll turn to Hareen Contractor, who's been involved with USAC and the E-rate program, who can talk more about that.
Thanks, Rudy. Yeah, I was just about to chime in. So, yeah, I mean, part of this purpose is to identify where there might just be some asymmetry of information. And one thing we got from the libraries themselves, as well as IMLS, is the libraries are looking toward their states, their broadband subject matter experts to be like, where can we get support? And sometimes they're relying on IMLS or ALA. But it was pretty clear from our conversations with IMLS that there's a lot of folks are not talking to each other. Like whether E-rate at USAC, their data team is not really talking to IMLS's team. No one's really talking to Department of Labor to like coalesce workforce grants in terms that could work for digital adoption. So we do envision one of the recommendations of more collaborative conversations on the federal level, particularly as it relates to broadband and digital adoption efforts, because it's a life cycle. You can't just stop at giving out the broadband grants. You need to start talking about the next level steps, and because that's how the libraries are thinking about it. And there's also just asymmetry of information about where some of the grants are going from either corporations or nonprofits. One library in one municipality might be getting some additional funding, and the one that's in the town next over may not be, even though they might be serving the same population. So there's a lot of room for some of this, and that's something we're going to continue to explore as we continue on this research.
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you, Hareen. So Dr. Nicole Turner Lee, you mentioned before your writings on this issue. So that we can enter it into the record, could we get you? There you are. Can you please give us some more information on where we can find that? Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And thank you again to the group. And yes, I need to follow protocol. So I will give the website for the article that was just published at the Brookings Institution yesterday. The website is www.brookings.edu/blog/TechTank2020-09-17, how courageous schools partnering with local communities can overcome digital inequalities during COVID-19. And so I offer again that for the record, for this group and for the public, just because it actually outlines some of the partnerships that schools and libraries need to have with the local community to bolster efforts to close the digital divide, particularly for vulnerable populations of Black and Brown children. So thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and apologies in advance for not submitting it. But Rudy in his blue suit actually gave me a lot of insights to actually want to share that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
The power of the blue.
Power of the blue, that's right. Any other committee members? Any other comments? If not, then we can break for lunch. Please do not exit the team meeting, but do turn off your mics and your videos. And we will return at 12:30. And I plan to take roll call at the beginning of our afternoon session. So I will see all of you soon. Thank you again. Welcome back to the meeting of the FCC Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment. Julie Saulnier, who is the Deputy DFO of the committee, had connections issues this morning, so I'd like to ask her to give us some remarks to open our afternoon session.
Good morning, good afternoon, excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. My video doesn't appear to be working, but I just wanted to say hello and tell you all that I think I mentioned at our last meeting that I was very much impressed with the passion and dedication of the members of this committee. And today, after countless hours of teleconferences, wee-hour emails, and repeated drafts of statements, agendas, and presentations, I can only say I'm even more impressed. I thank all of those who have worked so tirelessly, not pausing for a pandemic, in planning our various meetings, workshops, symposia, and showcases, and look forward to continuing to work with you all on the exciting events yet to come. And I applaud you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm glad that you got your connections issues worked out. It shows you the importance of connectivity.
It does.
So we will now turn our presentation over to Caroline Beasley, who chairs our Access to Capital Working Group. Caroline?
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon. It's an honor to be here today to present the progress of the Access to Capital Working Group. A special thank you to Chairman Pai and Michelle for your efforts in seeking diversity ownership in the broadcasting industry. Anna, thank you for chairing this committee during these very trying times and keeping us all on task. And thank you, Heather, for your guidance. And finally, a special thank you to Jamila and Julie for your help during this process. We truly could not have done this without you. The Access to Capital Working Group has been hard at work, and our subgroup chairs and committee members have been very focused and very agile. Since our last meeting, we have had 3 independent presentations from each of the respective groups. In addition, during our last presentation back in April, no one really understood the length and the impact that COVID would have on our subgroup and our materials and plans going forward. So we have had to tweak our plans to reflect this. Some of our subgroups were impacted more than others as a result of COVID and then the national unrest. For example, getting access to capital to buy a broadcast property in a world of COVID is literally impossible in today's environment. However, more advertising opportunities are presenting themselves to minorities due to the social injustice, as companies are seeking to advertise with minority-owned companies. And then finally, legislation has been presented for a tax certificate. So all of our subgroups have been active over the last several months. Going on to the next slide, our committee members, next slide, perfect. Our committee members are outlined on this slide, and I thank each of them for their participation during this process. It doesn't go without notice that during a time when many of the members on this committee were hard at work dealing with the daily stresses of saving their own companies, they still found time to participate on the many calls and meetings that we've had. On the next slide, you will note that our goals are to develop recommendations on how to improve access to capital for minorities and how to operate under the new normal. We're also reviewing new business opportunities. Next slide. The respective subgroups are listed on this slide with our subgroup chairs presenting today. Dewan McCoy is the chair of the Lending Finance subgroup. Nahaja Ama is the chair of the political subgroup, and Skip Dillard graciously accepted the role of chair on the broadcast subgroup as Dr. Shukla had to devote more time to her patients due to COVID. Each subgroup's goals are outlined as follows on the next slide. Lending Finance to provide education and information for financing a broadcast property pre and post-COVID. Political subgroup to provide education and information on the need and value of a tax certificate to incentivize diversity and ownership. And I will say that timing of this subgroup is appropriate given the legislation that's being proposed today. Our broadcast subgroup is to make recommendations on how minorities can generate and maintain revenue in an effort to sustain operations. Large companies have openly said that they would like to support minority-owned companies. So this is an opportunity that our group will be pursuing. Our first subgroup presentation is the lending finance subgroup with Dewan McCoy. Dewan, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Glad to be here. Thank you, Caroline, for being our outstanding chair, leading our working group. Thank you, Jameel, for being our designated officer and helping us along. So we really appreciate it. My first slide, which would be the next slide, we'll be discussing what we plan to do in the symposium this fall. The topics that we will cover for the symposium will be lending, and obviously to provide an education and information on various levels of criteria and expectations for financing and lending to purchase a broadcast property. As Caroline mentioned, nobody's loaning money right now. So what we decided to do is do it into 3 phases. The first phase is what lending looked like during normal circumstances, which would be pre-COVID, what COVID-related lending, including the Paycheck Protection Program, looked like during COVID, and what the aftermath of COVID is expected to look like on lending to broadcast properties. The next slide, and I think we're probably 2 slides behind now. And I'll pause until we catch up because this is a pretty important slide. Can we catch up? One more. Okay, looks like we're having technical difficulty. The first group of presenters that we'll have will do an overview on pre-COVID, and we plan to break down the purchases of media broadcast properties into 3 different levels: above 20 million, below 20 million, and smaller deals, $500,000 to $8 million. And we'll discuss each individual on how to raise money and how to become financed at these different levels. We have an expert that I failed to mention on our team, and that's Garrett Kamyati. Garrett is the leading entertainment television broadcast lender for U.S. Bank, and he specializes in lending to all levels of broadcasters that want to enter the business, middle road broadcasters, and large existing broadcasters as well. So he'll be chiming in later today. The next slide would be during COVID, how the COVID affected lending. And we'll talk about the Paycheck Protection Program from a recipient's perspective. We'll talk about it from a regional and national bank lending perspective. And we'll also talk about what the aftermath and prognosis will be on lending with the effect of COVID, which unfortunately will be long lingering after COVID because our comps or comparables for year-to-year revenue will be distorted. So those are the 2 main things, or 3 main things that we'll talk about during the symposium. One of the things that we talked about after our April meeting, and Caroline alluded to it, was one of the biggest obstacles and hurdles in having lenders finance broadcast institutions is the lack of collateral that a broadcast station usually gives. So what we did as a committee, we invited a pro, a very good professional, a 30-year media attorney, Frank Montero from Fletcher Hildreth, to do a presentation on how to specifically collateralize a license from a lending institution's standpoint. There's 3 slides that gives a summary of his presentation, but basically what he showed was if you have a lending institution that wants to collateralize an FCC license and stay within the guidelines of an FCC license, here's how you do it. Here's the verbiage. Here's the language in which you put into a asset purchase agreement or a loan document. So we've been progressing and trying to handle objections and overcome the obstacles in loaning and lending money to finance. And I think the symposium this fall is going to be pretty good and very informative on how to lend money. Garrett, do you have any comments or questions or anything that you'd like to add here? Garrett, you're on mute. Take your mute off if you're saying something.
Hey, I'm off mute now. One, thank you to Juan and thank you to Caroline. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that Caroline made at the outset that yes, COVID is completely, turned the apple cart upside down. Lending has effectively stopped in the broadcast space. Deal flow activity has contracted. And as Caroline said, a lot of companies in the broadcast space are dealing with the ramifications of COVID and just trying to get through this challenging period. I've been doing this for longer than I care to admit, and this COVID disruption is unlike anything any of us have ever experienced. I would say right now, from the bank perspective, a lot of the banks effectively dealt with the situation to basically create, a temporary mechanism to let companies sort of make it to a post-COVID state. But generally speaking, trying to get financing in this environment today is unlike anything that I've seen and dwarfs in comparison to the financial crisis of 2009 and 10, which at the time was much more draconian, but this is just unprecedented. So not to sound overly negative, but I think Juan's outline, I think will be beneficial to, and I think that we could share arts with respect to the PPP program. I could speak very briefly on the Main Street Lending Program and just general about what the banking environment was pre-COVID, currently, and hopefully post-COVID. So Dewan, turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Garrett. Jamila sent me an email and wanted me to comment briefly on the effect of COVID on a Black broadcaster like me. I'll be the first to admit that I'm a little different. I figured out the game a long time ago. So my COVID experience was not as harsh as maybe a Susan Allen's when she presented earlier. Mine was pretty decent from the standpoint of I was first in line to receive the Paycheck Protection loan, if you will. We received our loan on April the 17th. And this is a good segue into the symposium this fall, because I like to say that Dewan McCoy is hope. There is hope out there on having access to capital once you figure out the game and how the game is played, okay? And when I did a deal with my bank, I did a deal with a small regional bank. I did a deal prior with Garrett Kamyati. Garrett taught me a lot of things with the broadcast business. I moved on from Garrett and went with another bank because I had a smaller transaction. This bank made me a priority okay? And the reason he made me a priority was because I knew how to speak to a bank. That is going to be a segue into our symposium this fall. So again, we received our PPP money April 17th, and we were on the first batch. And I got to tell you, without that PPP money, I don't know, I would be struggling right now, put it that way. It came at the right time, and I didn't lay off anybody. So I'm very fortunate. I'm a little different than the rest of the country and other minority broadcasters that haven't figured out the game yet. I'll give you a last quick example. When COVID hit, my pacing dropped 45%, okay? And I didn't know what to do, but we called our bank and we filled out the application. In fact, we created the application form for the bank to use as a template. That's how quick we were, okay? And he used our template as a template for all of his other clients. So we got moved to the top of the line. My revenue was down 45%. It is getting better now. Second quarter, we were down 45%. Third quarter, we're going to be down 30%. And fourth quarter, we're looking a lot better. So there is hope out there. And hopefully we can get a really, really good attendance to the symposium this fall, because it's going to be really, really informative for people to learn how to get money lent to them. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jawan. Really appreciate that. Our next presentation is from Nahuja. And Nahuja, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by giving a special thanks to Anna Gomez and Heather Gates, who, as has been said, are very hands-on, having attended some of our political subgroup meetings, as well as that of other subgroups. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our working group leader, Caroline Beasley, who has been an excellent mentor and chair. Of course, our subgroup would not be where we are today if not for the excellent help of the 3 designated federal officers, Jamila Bess Johnson, Julie Saulnier, and Jameel Cadre. And of course, our subgroup is peopled by stellar members who represent experience across a wide span of communication and education vehicles. So our objectives are twofold. To highlight to the stakeholders, which are the minority and women owning and wanting to own stations, large broadcast companies involved in selling stations, legislatures crafting bills and seeking support for such, media advocacy groups, and of course, the public at large. So we want to highlight to these stakeholders in our symposium a way to keep a front of mind mindset of the need for broadcast diversity. And 2, to highlight to the same stakeholders how the tax certificate tool has in the past, and we believe can in the future, help achieve greater diverse broadcast ownership. First, we'll look at the track record. Have minority and women always had the kind of ownership we have right now? Has it been greater or less, and what has caused the change? Of course, the reauthorization of the tax bill already has support and recently moved forward with amendment substitutes adopted into the bill in the House Ways and Means Committee. Our symposium presentation is designed to persuade those without knowledge about and/or those unconvinced of the need and value to subsequently support this bill. This tax certificate bill is called, the short title is the Expanding Broadcast Ownership Opportunities Act. The outcomes that our political subgroup is seeking to achieve is, with the brief presentations and a co-moderated panel, is to help provide accessible information to those trying to acquire license in context with understanding what the previous tax certificate bill accomplished. So there's some obvious questions. Who do you contact? Is it a do-it-yourself job if you want to get a license? How long does the process take? What's available? Where do you find them? And provide guidance like who would be a good mentor? Is there and where is the professional help to do this? What do I tell my bank if it's my first license and I have no track record? So guidance to minorities and women in getting through the process successfully. Our speakers and panelists will provide answers, sources, and their perspective to the stakeholder audiences I mentioned earlier. We think this kind of fast-paced discussion, touching on information about how the tax certificate is needed and how it has worked in the past, is a good way to increase interest in it. Like the more people know about it, the more they will support it. And we hope the discussion by the panel will increase public and government support for the bill too. Next slide. So beginning with the two presentations, one speaker will touch on the history of licensing American Airways. We know there was a golden age of radio in the US, but it wasn't a golden age for all Americans. History will attest to licensing beginning as far back as the 1920s, but included virtually no ownership by minorities and women. It took some 30 more years for some licensing to open to minorities at all. Minorities were first licensed in 1949, and after 30 years, there were still only 40 radio or TV stations owned by people of color. The second speaker will discuss the current status of the tax certificate bill, which is structured to replicate the success of the earlier one that expired in 1995. The earlier one actually was successful in increasing ownership from the 40 people of color owning stations, the 40 that I mentioned, to over 288 radio and TV license before it expired in 1995. But history shows that the perennial challenges remained. So in fact, from 1997 to 1998, 3 years after the tax certificate had expired, minority-owned radio and TV stations barely increased, like by about 0.1%. And it has remained essentially the same ever since. This means that ownership concentration in the public airways of radio and TV remain empirically in the hands of a very few, which do not include even 10% minorities. And minorities and women who together make up more than 50% of the public in our country. Is this a problem? We think so, because at 25 years after the expiration of the tax certificate, we see trends in broadcast ownership that do not reflect as well as possible on the FCC's efforts to encourage broadcast diversity. We need diversity in viewpoints. We need an increased variety of formats and content. We need varied outlets. More independently owned outlets, even within a geographic market, are needed. And certainly more minority and women broadcasters, which without real-time tracking is still estimated to not be more than the approximately 3% it was when the tax certificate expired. Today, or in 2018 rather, out of 17,000 broadcasting licensing, people of color and women really only have about 500. So next slide. So as I said earlier, the political subgroups panel will be co-moderated. We expect the two moderators will ensure fast-flowing discussion as 4 panelists respond to questions directed to them to provide anecdotal, factual, and current information for our targeted audiences. One panel will provide personal illustrations of opportunities taken, including the process and steps. How will they speak to those opportunities taken? By describing their personal case and what helped them, how they got their first license under the now expired tax certificate, where they went from there. Did they acquire more licensing? Was it easier or not? Another panelist will share their experience with the station or stations they own and how they were able to, or how they want to acquire additional stations through the pending tax certificate bill, how that would actually benefit them personally and their footprint in the market where they are. These two panelists will be joined by two media industry panelists, one representing a large media industry and one representing small media industry. The media industry panelists will provide insight to how the tax certificate as a tax discount did and can enable their businesses to sell licenses to minorities and women in support of broadcast diversity as encouraged under the FCC. These panelists will delve into industry experience selling a license to people of color and women, how, for instance, selling to people of color and women can help enlarge audiences for radio and TV by broadening and deepening the listening base, how the industry actually views new owners and their audiences who are also become empowered. They may even provide information or reveal trends as they reflect on some new owners responding to their communities and the like. Given that our current coronavirus pandemic emergency reveals multi-level disparities across communities in areas of healthcare, education, race, etc., hampering even penetration of local and national response, more diversity in broadcast ownership is critically important. In summary, our symposium will begin with two presentations, one providing relevant historical context for the audience to underscore the fact that the tax certificate bill is a known, successful, quantitative piece of legislation needing reauthorization, and two, providing a status update of the current and recently amended bill, which is more inclusive in supporting diversity ownership of stations. Both presentations will speak to the fact that HR 3957, the Expanding Broadcast Ownership Opportunities Act, addresses low diversity ownership of station and seeks to have, at the very least, the success that the previously expired tax certificate achieved. And finally, our subgroup views the tax certificate bill as a focus of good business and doing good by our public airways in supporting diversity and broadcast ownership. New owners and audiences will be empowered as a result of being able to buy stations under the pending tax certificate bill and can help important issues reach larger audiences and hearing platforms. The panel will provide illustrations of diverse opportunities taken and achieved, their personal cases. And finally, we are reminded daily in the time of the coronavirus of the critical need for broadcast diversity as a public interest. Locally important communication outlets owned by diverse broadcasters embedded in their communities are likely to be able to provide more critical information that can reach community audiences and thereby help address current multi-level disparities across these same communities. We expect our symposium to last anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to report out. And if anyone has any questions, our subgroup members and I can entertain a few questions. Hello? We've had a little technical difficulties, I see.
So Cindy Benavides has a question for you, Dr. Nahuja.
Okay.
Dr. Nahuja, thank you so much for that presentation. And I wanted to know if by any chance there's a breakdown by ethnicity, gender of the 500 licenses of the 17,000 acquired by people of color women?
I don't have a breakdown, and I have to say that was in 2018, which means it probably has changed somewhat since then, you know, particularly in light of the coronavirus. But I don't have the breakdown of it. I can, I can see if I can get the breakdown, but what I had was just the general total that I provided.
That would be extremely helpful, Dr. Nahuja, only because, you know, the trend that we're finding, particularly in the Latino community, is that the data does not exist, which means that we can't change the policy.
Yes.
And so, you know, any data that's out there would be super helpful. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
I see Julie Saulnier has something as well. Julie?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I just wanted to say that the FCC puts out a report every 2 years breaking down minority ownership by the racial categories specified by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And those reports are on our website. If you go to the Media Bureau page on the FCC website, they're called the 325 reports. So you can always check in and look at those. They're updated every 2 years.
Jamila?
Oh, thank you, Anna. And thank you, Julie. I just wanted to add that the Form 323 also captures female-owned broadcasters. So it has a lot of information on it. And so we would certainly encourage you all to go to the Media Bureau webpage and look at some of that data. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we will continue on. With that, we'll ask Skip Dillard, who is the chair of the broadcast subgroup, to make his presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Caroline. Just wanted to take a quick moment to thank the members of my subgroup, professionals ranging from broadcast owners to multicultural advertising, and I learned so much from them and Dr. Shukla for assisting us as well with putting together the presentation. Our goals were to identify potential ratings measurement metrics for minority and women-owned broadcasters in order to attract sustainable advertising revenue from local and regional advertisers. Many new broadcasters find this to be their #1 challenge in order, is to find ways to get the revenue flowing. Not to pick on Caroline Beasley, but her family would be a perfect example, starting with a small station in Goldsboro, North Carolina, growing it over time, being able to afford to subscribe to the rating service, then buying into bigger markets, and eventually getting stations that were cash flow positive, that required a lot less work. We want to educate women, minority, and multi-ethnic broadcasters on how to reach multicultural departments of major advertising agencies. Very often, you'll find today that there's more than one decision maker. It may be a committee. How do we reach key people, and how do we generate more dollars for broadcast properties? Support continued and increased use of a broad range of broadcasters, including those that particularly serve minority communities, to air federal, state, and local government advertising campaigns regarding important initiatives such as public health information during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. We want to identify potential ratings measurement metrics for minority and women-owned broadcasters in order to attract sustainable advertising from local and regional. Of course, the action is going to involve inviting on our upcoming symposium representatives from Nielsen Media to discuss ratings measures available for small, minority, multi-ethnic broadcasters on November 6th for our Access to Capital Symposium. We also plan to educate women, minority, and multi-ethnic broadcasters on how to reach multicultural departments at major advertising agencies. We want to have executives from multicultural departments, which we will have from advertising agencies, at our November 6th symposium. Next slide. I presented on August 21st, Programming in a Pandemic. It originally was personally developed by myself for the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters. I presented this for our subcommittee. Now, the program sought to make the point that broadcasters and our content become even more relevant and important during times of crisis, which we saw this year. During our discussion, we attempted to give an insider's view of the overall process of preparing our staff, serving our communities during these crazy times in 2020. And we included the following discussion points in the presentation. Broadcasters as first responders, our on-air talent, our technical people, our engineering teams donned a mask and were right there, providing information, keeping us up to speed with technology that helped us at a point where many people could not come into New York due to the COVID crisis. We also had protests from the George Floyd killing near the station, preventing people from getting there. And so definitely broadcasters join the group of first responders who have been there. Broadcasters' use of technology, as I just mentioned, was crucial. Social media, crucial to continue uninterrupted serving their communities. We had to get very creative very fast. All of a sudden, we learned how to use Zoom to reach our audiences online with panel discussions with COVID officials, with census officials. Everything we normally would bring people together to do, we now had to do virtually. And of course, preparation of broadcast stations teams to the new normal. What happens when you find that, hey, we're not going to need all this space, that many people, such as our sales departments, may have to work remote for the near future? What happens? When do our DJs all return to work? Or will they be broadcasting from home? Next slide. Preparing talent for disruption. Most important for audiences was separating important information from the fake news, from everybody on Facebook, and getting ads for special, hey, beat COVID before everybody else deals with the vaccine. Things that were not factual, things that were not true, misinformation. That's crucial, and that's something broadcasters work overtime to do. Air check and critique talent performance in relation to the crisis. I always believed what separates a great on-air talent or TV talent from an okay one is truly when they have to stop the music, when they have to stop the entertainment and communicate with people. And also to keep people calm during times of unrest, such as we had with our protest in New York City. Social media, we talked a bit about the verses with the artist battles online, all kinds of new ways to not only generate entertainment and engage our listeners off there, but also some revenue streams are out there too. Many companies from, you can go down the line, many product categories have become very interested in what we are doing online, not just entertainment, but also to give out information on health and dealing with the pandemic. We talked about using our talents, eyes and ears. They're the people on the streets. They're getting the calls from the listeners. They're the ones checking a direct message from a listener on Facebook about COVID testing. Hey, where can I go get tested? I'm hearing it costs $50 at this clinic and I don't have that money. Those were things that were coming back to us constantly from our talent, which helped us shape the information and also figure out what we should be focusing on. Radio has traditionally not done the best job, and TV as well. It's talking about why we're here and why we're relevant. What we do beyond entertaining people or playing music or doing the 5 p.m. news. But we are always seeking to not only engage our audiences, but empower them, encourage them, help them find jobs, which will be a major initiative coming up as we start to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on our employment sector here. You know, we have to tell our story. We were able to, on our stations, do over 200,000 meals through our local food bank, through donations from our listeners. These are things that all make us relevant and more important than ever. Help audiences deal with a possible second wave. How do we go from where we are now to making sure we don't go backwards? Of course, consider the impact of race relations with your staffs and audiences. The Black Lives Matter movement. How do we address these in a very diverse broadcast environment? How do we talk about inclusion? How do we train the next group of general managers, the next group of sales managers from a seller, the next group of program directors from an assistant program director, a music director? These questions are being asked, and we have, even in our organization as well, which is very diverse, asked about what is the plan for growing women and minority talent for our business. Next slide. While the immediate effect of the pandemic was significant drop to broadcaster advertising revenues, some positive signs, thankfully, are beginning to emerge. We definitely have a need for accurate health information and combating inaccurate or misleading information. That has increased. We have seen more dollars for ads about where to get tested, to COVID practices, and we are assured that as vaccines become available, there will be more actionable and factual information that will need to reach the masses, particularly in minority and hard-to-reach communities that have been diversely impacted by COVID-19. Advertisers are increasingly aware of the need to reach out to minority and disadvantaged communities, and they are seeking ways to do so. Good example of that, we have already gotten inquiries from many advertisers about having a higher participation in Black History Month in February. So just one example there. As a result of these trends, minority and women broadcasters will have more access to advertising dollars. So stay tuned for November 6, 2020. I'm very excited about our ACDDE workshop on minority and women broadcasters' access to revenue, featuring Nielsen and multicultural advertisers to help us get on the path to a much better 2021. And I believe we can move to questions from here if there are any.
So if there are no questions, thank you, Skip. I mean,
actually, Caroline, sorry, Caroline, I see Janelle Trigg has her hand up.
Yes, thanks, Julie. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Skip. This is Janelle Trigg. Good afternoon. Skip, I'm delighted to see you leading this effort, and it's great that you're serving on the committee. As you may remember, I have a 20+ year background in advertising and marketing sales in both the Chicago and Baltimore markets. And your emphasis on reaching out to multicultural departments and major ad agencies is extremely important. I'm curious, back in the day, and it's been some time since I've been on the streets, there used to be quite a few minority-owned advertising agencies that received some budgets from major corporations, major advertisers. Granted, certainly not as much in the major streamlined agencies, but still had support for Black radio and Black-owned media. Just curious, are there any left minority-owned agencies? or have they been subject to some of the systemic racism and COVID-19 issues that other Black businesses have? Are they not getting their fair share of advertising support as well?
I've talked to two. Carol Williams' agency is still going strong. Irving Street, which is long handled McDonald's minority multicultural spending. They're hanging in. They're making it okay. When we talk about systemic racism, these agencies have always had a harder way up.
Yes,
the
indeed.
main problem today is, what I found is you do have situations in which these agencies get an unfair representation of dollars that should be going to multicultural. The monies aren't what they should be. And number two, when you, seek out monies, major non-multicultural oriented stations that have a sizable multicultural audience, for instance, WBLS is an African-American station, has been serving African-American adults since 1974. Well, WLTW, which is a full-service general market AC station, still competes with us for some of those dollars, especially for at-work listing. They'll say, well, hey, 10% of our AC listing is African-American, many of it coming from the office environment pre-COVID. So they will make a battle for us for dollars that, technically would have been earmarked for a station that was totally, dominantly African-American, if you understand what I'm saying. So it is still a battle on the agency side. And honestly, we need more multicultural agencies, and that's on every side, run by women, Hispanics, African-American. We are seriously, tremendously unrepresented. And the biggest problem, and that's for another discussion on another day, is that we have to train salespeople. We are, spotting everybody, but the next generation of people that can sell both traditional sales ads and digital, that's what we've got to get into the colleges, and we've got to recruit. That's when you start to have more agencies. All of them at one time sold advertising for one entity or another, TV, broadcast, and the like.
Thank you. It's good to know that Carol is still around. Just curious, are you going to also, during the symposium, provide some anecdotal information that can help supplement and update the report that came out, I believe it was 1999, when being number one is not enough? You may remember that it didn't matter how large a minority-owned station's ratings were, they still did not get their fair share of advertising. It would be very helpful, I think, to provide either some statistical or anecdotal information at your symposium to update that report.
I will get with the group. That's an excellent point. We actually had an internal meeting on that very recently. It is still very possible to be third or fourth in the ratings as a station serving, for instance, African Americans, and number 11 in billing. That's a phenomenon that we see in numerous markets. So thank you for that. And I will get with the group and Jameel and the crew and see what we can do in Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to the November 6th symposium. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you, Skip. As you can see, timing is everything. Positive for some, negative for others, but Skip, your presentation really showed us that, for local broadcasters, while revenue was dramatically impacted through COVID, it really gave us the opportunity to shine, to do what we do best, and that is serve our community. So thank you for sharing, all those great things that you all had done and everything that you're facing during this time.
Thank you.
Our symposium will be November 6th, as you all have heard, and we are planning to help you. Our aim is to help you address both the positives and the negatives of that have presented themselves from COVID. So we look forward for you to attending You have heard a recap. It's going to be informative, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be enlightening. So, and hopefully it will be very, very helpful for you. So we hope you will join us. And with that, that is our presentation today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Duan, Nahuja, and Skip, and everyone else on the working group and the subgroups. Again, really great energy, expertise, as you can see, and I'm really looking forward to some of these upcoming events. Now, I know we've had some questions. Is there any discussion by the full committee? At this point, anyone who would like to say something, if you would please raise your hand and I will acknowledge you. I don't see any raised hands, so I want to thank you again, Caroline, and the members of the Access to Capital Working Group for all of this great work. We are now going to take a 15-minute break. We're running a little early, so we should resume at 1:37. I forgot to take roll when we came back from lunch, so I will take roll when we get back. And I will look forward to talking to you in about 15 minutes. Everyone can turn their mics and computers off. I mean, not off, on mute. Thank you. All right, welcome back to everybody to the Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment meeting. As I mentioned, I forgot to take roll at the after our lunch, so I am going to take roll now. As before, when I call your name, please unmute and let us know you're on. Raul Alarcon.
Present.
Susan Allen. Caroline Beasley. Here. Cindy Benavides.
Present.
Laura Baracol. And please remember to mute yourself if you are not speaking.
Did you just call me? This is Susan Allen.
Hi, Susan. Thank you.
I was using a different mouse. I got it. I have 3 mouses in front of me.
All right.
Technology.
Technology. That's right. We're all becoming more.
Why doesn't my mouse move? I said.
All right. Laura, are you on? Maria Brennan. Rudy Brioche. Marine contractor.
Hi, Anna. Did you mention me?
Sorry, who's that?
It's Rudy.
Oh, hi, Rudy. Yes, thank you. Skip Dillard.
I am present.
Michelle Duke. Deborah Elam.
I'm here.
Marita Coley. Flippin.
I'm here. I'm here.
Rashidi Hendricks.
Present.
I know David Honig is present, but technically unable to respond. So thank you, David. Ron Johnson.
Here.
Sherman Kizert. I know Dr. Turner Lee is on. Roy Litland. Duan McCoy.
Here.
Clint Odom.
Here.
Sean Perryman. Henry had some technical issues. I don't know if you were able to get back on. Stephen Roberts. Brian Scarpelli. Dr. Shukla.
Present.
Marie Silla. S. Janelle Trigg.
Good afternoon. Present.
James Winston. And Chris Wood.
Felicia West is also here.
Thank you, Felicia.
Rosa Mendoza is also present.
And Dr. Fallon Wilson is present as well.
And Anna, you have me because I came really early for roll call.
You did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I like that enthusiasm. Shelley Blakeney. Sorry about that, Shelley. You are Marie's alternate. Anyone else I'm missing? All right. Thank you very much. So our next presenter will be Dr. Nicole Turner Lee, who will lead the Diversity in Tech Sector Working Group report.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the gracious introduction. And thank you to all members of the committee for hanging in there. And the fact that we're early suggests that everything that we're saying is probably right. So I'm going to keep with the tradition of staying within our time as we provide our presentation from this working group. First and foremost, let me just say this. First, I want to say a formal thank you to FCC Chairman Ajit Pai for reconvening and rechartering this committee. I think it is very important that we continue to have these conversations. I also want to say thank you to the other commissioners, particularly Commissioner Jeffrey Starks, that was actually very much involved with that new diversity program for interns. I think recognizing that there are real barriers to entry and actually doing something about it is really important. So thank you, Commissioner, for actually doing your part in ensuring diversity and inclusion. And we applaud you for those efforts. And we look forward to helping you to find the candidates necessary to take those jobs. I would also like to say thank you to our chairwomen, Anna and Heather, for stewarding this committee. Your great work, and as you said, your diligence of being on every single call was not unnoticed. And we thank you for your feedback, as well as the FCC designated officers, the 3 Js, Jameel Best, Jameel, and Julie, for your excellent assistance of particularly people like myself who are shepherding this effort voluntarily along with other things. And to the other working group chairs, as well as members of this committee, again, I say thank you, because as I think about the framing of our presentation, which is the final one, I actually want to say to my colleagues that you've done a really good job. You've done a good job setting up, I think, the conversation's direction of why this committee is very necessary at this critical time. Not only has every committee just emphasized the importance of dealing with COVID-19 and the devastating effects that it's had on communities of color, but we're also talking about a racial equity inflection point in this country where it was video, it was media that actually showed the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that a police officer had his knee lodged into the neck of George Floyd, and it was publicized. And as to Carolyn's previous presentation, it was publicized, but we need more owners of color who are actually part of this narrative of sort of helping us to unpack and dismantle systems of oppression that affect communities of color. So I'm excited to actually add on to that narrative because my job has been made easy because our committee equally cares about the recommendations that we're going to propose at a time like this. the time where we have to think about, how effective this committee will be going forward, which is now. Because I think everything has been mentioned up until this point has really showed the critical nature of why we need diversity within our communications ecosystem. I could not do this alone. So the next slide shows all of the members of our working group. And that would be, now I might need some help unless I'm supposed to do this. Okay, I was gonna say, I can't do two things at one time. But the diversity and tech sector working group members are listed there. From Maria Brennan, Rosa, Deborah, Marita, Rashidi, Dr. Johnson, Clint, Sean Perriman, Brian Scarpelli, Dr. Fallon, and Christopher Wood, who I actually give a great thank you to Chris, who actually helped us with the compilation of our slides. Next slide, please. And what we did, similar to other groups, is that we broke into 3 areas. One is workforce diversity. The other one is startup diversity, and the final team will be supplier diversity. And this is the order in which we plan to present this afternoon. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Reminding people, go back one. Okay. Reminding people as to the if you go back one slide, please. Okay. Reminding people of the objectives of this committee. Forward one. Okay. The objectives of this committee, which has followed through, it's okay, just stay right where you're at. Followed through has been around studying the underemployment or lack of promotion opportunities for women and people of color in the tech sector, and proposing a range of approaches that businesses could use to address these issues, highlighting best practices of industry leaders in training and employment diversity, and developing recommendations for innovative training programs in science, technology, engineering, and math. And so I just wanted to remind people of the original charter of this particular subcommittee and the fact that last year, the subcommittee issued a report that was very vital in sort of canvassing what high-tech companies were doing in the space of workforce diversity and supplier diversity. And we intended to, in this year, continue that path. Now, I want to stay right here before we move this slide and just suggest, as I've said before, that this pandemic is still here and racial equity has not yet subsided and probably will not for decades to come. But what's interesting is that digital access has increasingly become the new normal, something that we've heard in the previous subgroup, at least Rudy's subgroup, when it comes to closing the digital divide. Now, for those of you who can't necessarily see the bars in that slide, which I also cannot, this actually comes from Pew Research in terms of the types of activities that people are doing during this time. And I think just from illustration purposes, the high length or the long length of the bars suggests that people are doing just so much more online, from buying groceries, to watching movies, to staying in touch with friends and family, to doing things that we are doing right now, which is broadcasting a government advisory meeting online. Next slide, please. I'm going to type it in. I think I have some background noise that I'm not being heard.
We can hear you. I don't know if Vanessa's having technical issues again.
Okay, so I'll just wait one second. If Vanessa just can proceed to the next slide before I go on. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. Before I go into the individual working group reports, I would like to just bring our attention, Lord, Vanessa, now I'm having technical issues, to our attention to some background information that I think is of importance to our working group. First and foremost, access to technology is playing a significant role in response to COVID-19. And as I've mentioned in the previous slide, we've seen an increase in the types of functions and activities that are being demanded via internet use or online use. And interestingly enough, for people, we've actually seen a lot of resiliency and capacity in the networks that are carrying these increased functions. We've also seen the creation of technology is equally important in the impact on jobs, products, and services. And I say that because as we think about digital transformation, and I'm currently writing a book about this in terms of the US digital divide, we're actually seeing a new wave of jobs become created as a result of the digital age. So whereas a digital divide has sort of been exacerbated as a result of COVID-19, we've also seen jobs created in spaces that we did not know or forecast were going to happen. I call this like our new digital normal. If you look at the statistics that I presented, for example, 21% of Americans have said that they've ordered groceries online or through an app because of the coronavirus outbreak. And that makes sense because of the mandated social distancing. And we're also seeing a large proportion of urban and suburban residents who have access, of course, who are now accessing restaurants and other types of commercial establishments through online applications. And I think any of us that are on this call have done it at least once, given the boundaries and the restrictions of being able to go in person to any of these stores. When we also think about, again, that network infrastructure meeting the increased online demand and accommodating important uses, as I've mentioned just previously, we've seen these great surges, but we've not necessarily seen the extent to which many of us might have predicted huge blackouts when it comes to resiliency of networks. That speaks to our ability to have a meeting like this and other meetings that are happening concurrently as a result of having some type of network infrastructure that is maintaining itself. Again, pointing back to the digital divide, it does not necessarily mean that there are people who are equally benefited from what we're doing now. And I think Rudy's group, sufficiently pointed out some of the challenges of being offline. I call those folks digitally invisible. At the same token, we are going to see a lot of new use cases like telemedicine and telehealth, what we're seeing in virtual education, among other use cases being used over networks in ways that we've never seen them done before. That is, again, why, and I have to keep caveating, why it's very problematic when we don't get everybody online, that we actually see the type of digital inequities that happen in schools. And then finally, I would say that these challenges that existed before the pandemic in diversity and inclusion in workforce, despite the growth of new industries, despite the new expansion of use cases, are still going to require levels of diversity and inclusion in workforce, supply of diversity in programs, as well as access to capital for tech founders of color. And let me tell you why that's still important. While we see this growth, we have not necessarily seen equal growth when it comes to the types of businesses that are being developed, established, and managed by founders of color or other vulnerable populations. And that's quite problematic if we know that the new normal of digital is actually going to be the game changer when it comes to economic and social growth. With that being said, and I'm going to just shortly turn over to my group, I want you all to keep in mind 3 bullet points that will resonate throughout the 3 presentations that we give you today. 1, women and people of color still feel unwelcomed in the tech sector and have high rates of attrition in spite of the efforts that we have to actually get them connected into this industry. I personally recently participated on a panel of some research that was done by AEI that surveyed people of color who work in the tech industry, who were mature people, who were mature professionals, who essentially said that they leave because they do not feel that they fit in to that culture. That's problematic, and that's a reference that I've provided, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Rosa and her group as to what we should do about it as part of the charge of this committee. Secondly, tech startups founded by people of color often do not have critical venture capital investments. And as it was mentioned, for example, in the Access to Capital group, equally in the venture capital space for tech startups, we are not seeing the infusion of capital in those companies that essentially could be leading some of the driving post-recovery efforts, given the fact that, they could be closer to the ground when it comes to creating more trustworthy AI. They could be helping to sort of get rid of algorithmic bias. The lack of equal allocation of venture capital to startups at a time where digital is becoming the new normal is problematic. And it's something that I am hoping that Dr. Wilson will address as part as what we plan to do about it within the subgroup. And then finally, even in the midst of a pandemic, business diversity and procurement of women and people of color still matter. When we think about the unequal distribution of wealth, When we think about the fact that, and it was mentioned by Susan Allen, that we are seeing, for example, a statistic that I just read, 100,000 small businesses close, permanently close as a result of this pandemic. 40% of Black-owned businesses, for example, permanently stopped existing in communities of color. The devaluation of Black communities and Latino communities as a result of this pandemic. That does not necessarily mean for companies that are still in business that they do not prioritize their relationships with diverse suppliers. So led by Dr. Johnson, we're actually going to hear from our group why we need to actually assess the cost through solid research, solid conversations that, again, implore, in many respects, the commission, of which we have direct authority to, of this committee, to think about ways to keep that conversation going. As I was listening to the previous group on access to capital, my heart sank, because as some have said with the health disparities of COVID-19, when vulnerable people get it, it's not like they catch a cold, they catch the flu. And it is apparent that when Black-owned businesses and Latino-owned businesses or diverse businesses in general are impacted by the consequences of something so devastating, it's not like we can recover very quickly, which is, again, why it's important to have a conversation on how do we get more people in and prepare so that they fit in these new economies that are the future of industries. How do we understand how to create an ecosystem where they have equal access to capital, particularly in a tech entrepreneurship state that is going to require the support, talent, and skills of founders of color? And 3, how do we ensure that diversity in our supplier procurement programs still matter? So with that, I actually want to start with, and this is how we're actually going to lay it out, with Rosa, who will start with the workforce development report out for this meeting. When she is completed, we will pivot to Dr. Fallon Wilson, who was the subgroup chairwoman for the startup subgroup of this committee. And then we will end graciously with Dr. Ron Johnson, who will talk about the supplier diversity outputs that have come since our last meeting. I will then return and see if there are any questions from this distinguished group for the subgroup. With that, I pass it over to Rosa and her slide.
Thank you, Nicole. And good afternoon, everyone. So we changed our plan a little bit, our group changed our plan, and we are now going to focus on educating people from underserved communities on how to get a job in the tech industry. Nicole, you mentioned some of the reasons why people from our communities don't get a job or don't have a job or don't keep a job in the tech industry. And one of the reasons is that they don't know about the resources, they don't know what road to take in order for them to be able to get a job. So that's what we want to do. We want to help educate our community on how to get a job in the tech industry. So our goal is to provide information and resources to students from underserved communities, such as advice on how to build a strong resume, networking skills guidance, advice on how to interview and how to land the job, information about opportunities in the tech and telecom industry, information about coursework and grade requirements for certain tech jobs. We want to emphasize the importance of STEM education, and we want to provide information about the tech culture. And I also give advice on the experience needed for some tech jobs, such as internships, volunteer work, etc. Can you go to the third slide, actually, please?
Yes, and Rosa, Nancy has joined, so good. So we're back on track.
Okay, perfect. So our target audience is students and influencers, high school students, juniors and seniors, college students, guidance counselors, placement officers, and parents. We plan on partnering with tech companies, STEM organizations, affinity groups, and others who may be interested in partnering with us. Fourth slide, please. We are going to deliver our message via a virtual summit, and it's going to be titled The Road to Tech Jobs, and it's going to be on Friday, January 15th at 3 p.m. We will provide more details as we get closer to the date. We are going to have panelists and keynote speakers who are subject matter experts, and we hope all of you can join us as well. Last slide, please. At the end of the summit, we are going to give a Road to Tech Jobs document to all the participants, and that document will include a summary of key points from presenters, provide resources relevant to securing a job in the tech industry, and it will also provide a feedback mechanism. We believe that our summit will help educate people from underserved communities about how to prepare to get a job in the tech industry, and therefore it will help create a pipeline of qualified, diverse candidates for the tech industry. That's all I have. Marita and Dev, did I miss anything? Would you like to add anything else?
I think you did a great job. This is Deb. I think, again, having been on the other side of this, where people are hired, a lot of times students get to the end of college and it's just too late. They haven't taken the right courses, they haven't gotten the right grades, they haven't had the right summer experiences. So our goal, as Rosa said, is to get to students very early so that they can know how to really map out and give them a document, actually hand them something that they and their parents and supporters can have to map out, a road to not just a job in the tech sector, but a tech job as well.
Same here. This is Marita. I really enjoyed working with Rosa and Deborah. And as you have noticed, we did come up with a change in direction because we wanted to, reach out to the pipeline. Really, a lot of the issues that come up in this area have to do with the pipeline. So we think that this virtual job summit, tech prep summit, whatever you want to call it, is going to really get to the audience we want. Also, for me, being last generation, I recall that former FCC Chairman Bill Kennard was, he got introduced to the FCC when he was in high school, I think, or junior high school, when he was on the Dinah Shore show in the audience. And I think about that a lot when I think about exposing the FCC to younger people because it's not necessarily known. So I think this is a great way to bring in students and help to build the pipeline. So thank you.
And Rosa, this is Nicole. If I could just add in, and you guys did a fantastic job. And it's okay that you change, right? Because you got to do what you can't is real so that we actually have impact. Again, tying this back to the previous announcement from the chairman about the FCC diversity internship makes a lot of sense. So hopefully there'll be some connections there or presentation by the commissioner on that program at this event.
Right. Thank you, Nicole.
Any other comments from this group before we pivot to our next subgroup leader? All right, we will hold questions until the end. Let's pivot to Dr. Fallon Wilson.
Good afternoon. First, I have to say thank you, Dr. Nicole Turner Lee, for setting the foundation of our conversation and bringing the energy post-lunch. So I shade to that. I have to say also a thank you to Jamila, Julie, and Jameel. Y'all were awesome this term with scheduling. And because we had some challenges, but y'all were so patient with me. So I appreciate you for that. And to my amazing co-chair, Rashidi Hendricks, who will come on this conversation as well. Thank you for co-leading into our subcommittee. Our Startup Diversity Group is really tasked with promoting the roles of minority women in small business organizations, in particular, how they can lead in this digital economy. Most of our conversation, and rightly so from some of our other subgroups, is focusing on how capital formations and access to capital is working for minority women and small business entities, or we're talking specifically about founders. But our group really wanted to talk about who are the support organizations in the U.S. that are supporting minority women, small business tech support organizations who are supporting on the ground entrepreneurs. And so to help examine these organizations and to see how we can help sustain their vitality pre, post, and during COVID. And so what we did is that we decided to gather about 28 of these organizations from across the country. And these leaders of these organizations, they come from and they represent various groups, from Latinx communities to African-American entrepreneurs to LGBTQIA communities and to our veteran communities. And then we decided also to ask them to share any additional information they would want us to share with the full committee. To date, we have only spoken with in great conversations with about 10 of these organizations nationally. And once again, these organizations represent a diversity of groups. And some of the organizations that we've spoken with range from Anita Borg, where they work specifically with women in tech, all the way up to Camelback Ventures, which is a incubation organization that supports Black, Latinx, First Nation people, and various other amazing groups of people to develop tech entrepreneur and social impact companies. What we have found is that most of these organizations, number one, were founded by people who were entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs themselves, right? Who realized that trying to raise capital or dealing with some of the technical challenges in launching their tech company or their tech-enabled company, that they realized it was really extremely hard. And so they developed nonprofits, right, to deal with this issue so that what they experienced as tech founders, that others would not experience the same thing. And so, and also of this group that we have spoken with, many of them have said that 80% of them, 89% of them said that they have been affected by COVID, meaning that not only are they having to support directly the founders from these various marginalized communities, but they also are realizing that as an organization themselves, as a backbone organization for these entrepreneurs, that they're struggling to keep their doors open too. And lastly, once again, yes, and so they're all affected by COVID. Some of the challenges that they've outlined as support organizations for entrepreneurs in these various communities that they experience as an organization that supports entrepreneurs is that they're having to shift everything online, right? They're used to either their accelerators, incubators, or their nonprofits being able to have a high touch impact with shepherding their entrepreneurs through the experiences of either getting capital or rewriting their business plans. And some of them, because some of the people we've actually talked with work with entrepreneurs in high school and trying to figure out the whole remote learning piece for them, in addition to figuring out how to prepare them in their businesses to launch in remote space, depending if their families has access to broadband. And so those were some of the challenges. In addition to that, there seems to be, in this new space of COVID and this new space of like racial reckoning for our nation, there is a lot of resources flowing to support traditional civil rights organizations that are supporting Black and Brown communities. However, many of the tech support entrepreneurship organizations that we spoke with realize that they're not necessarily benefiting from all of the foundation and private dollars that are flowing in the space, and they would like to see that rectified. And so, Rashidi, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Do you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, so just to add on to what Dr. Fallon has mentioned, and we want to thank you for all your hard work and for everything that you've done. We appreciate it, first of all. I think some of the takeaways that that we basically really encountered was that, work done by these organizations have increased the presence and the lack of representation in multiple tech-related industries. So, I feel like the overall diversity has allowed kind of an archetype, person of color to have access to funding and employment and business development. Also, minorities make a large amount of the tech entrepreneurs, but not necessarily inside the building. CEOs of tech companies have made many strides to appoint diversity and inclusion initiatives, but they have not translated across various areas and overall culture. So that work needs to be done in that area. We also know that while major markets like Detroit and San Francisco and Atlanta, New York, Los Angeles and Chicago have benefited from some of the programs, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in some of the B and C markets. So it's about the opportunities that are kind of matriculating down to the underserved. So, we realize that, there are some challenges, and we realize that that there's a lot of work to be done. COVID has kind of allowed a lot of companies to pivot and be able to create programs and create opportunities. And I think that they're still trying to figure out how to serve those opportunities to entrepreneurs and people who are also learning on the programming side. Some of the activities and programs have now become virtual, and they also are useful, but they also kind of present a challenge depending on the tech setup of the homes of those underserved communities. Because some people don't have access to the equipment and the ability to be able to use like a Zoom or things like that, because they may not have a computer in their household, or the ability to have Wi-Fi. So, and then on the funding side, funding has been an issue with some of these organizations in regards to access. Not too different than before COVID, but how do smaller organizations compete for capitalization of private and federal funding has been the main conversation. Also, there was a lot of very little awareness, as well as agency accountability for opportunities in federal funding. For example, with the Small Business Administration or the Commerce Department's Minority Business Administration. I think the solution for that was really to work towards mainlining information for RFPs, grants, and federal funding deadlines. And, I would say lastly, the employment and retention of COVID has not allowed people of color to retain their jobs. And often they're the people that are first to let go from some of these companies. I think that's another takeaway that we got from our conversations, that we have to figure out how to kind of divert that. And, I think, as you can see on the slide, I think it's some of the ideas that we like are the tax breaks for the tech organizations and the federal design minority founders for their first 3 to 5 years. I think that could really create a lot of leverage and opportunities. And, I think that, we're often not in the conversation when there are different rounds of funding. As the friends and family round is usually the first round that within the funding cycles of a startup, after which is the seed round. The angel round, the seed round, and Series A. So I think that these incentives for funding for the friends and family can potentially create more opportunities, because we'll have more people who are invested. Recently you've seen the rise of gifting programs and susus, things like that. So we need to figure out how we can kind of divert that into these investments into some of these businesses. And then lastly, again, like I said about the Small Business Administration, maybe creating a pipeline so that some of these these founders can also have an opportunity to federal access. I think that a lot of the federal programs are available, but if you don't know about it, then you don't necessarily get the opportunity to get a pathway to the resource. So I think that we realize that, those are the challenges that we want to implement, and we are going to continue to kind of research through the next few months as we're continuing our interviews.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much. Before we go into supply diversity, is there anybody else, Clint, that you want to actually chime in on the report that Dr. Fallon and Rashidi gave?
Thank you. No, I just want to commend everyone on the work that's been happening so far. One of the things I like to remind people is that tech startups have been able to thrive even in terrible economic times. Just a little reminder that WhatsApp, Uber, Groupon, Slack, Airbnb launched right after the 2008 economic crisis. And the kind of enthusiasm that we've seen from, or at least not willing to be, conquered by economic conditions. We've got a real vibrant tech sector out there, and I think we've just got to be able to find ways to connect them to capital, connect them to entrepreneurship, and some of these ideas are worth exploring. We know the FCC doesn't have the ability to make these things happen, but these are definitely legislative and policy ideas that should be brought to the Hill and into the agency. So I'm just excited to be taking notes and to be in the presence of some of these really awesome startup companies and founders.
Can I say one thing, Nicole, before you jump?
Sure, you can. Yeah.
And I know this may seem like an oxymoron because when we said it in the presentation, we said that we're working with organizations that support tech startups, right? But then we also said the broadband issue. I just want to connect that super quick, right? So some companies may be tech enabled. They may have had someone go and create their app, right? But it doesn't mean that they have broadband at home or they have quality broadband, especially if they're in a multi-dimensional home and they have like 5 people. And I have to say that because I know when you hear, you're like, but you're supporting tech startups. How they not have internet? Well, it's very easily. It depends on the quality and the strength of it. And also they may not be the technical minds behind the actual apparatus that they're putting out as a product. So just wanted to clarify that.
Well, no, that makes sense, Dr. Wilson. It's almost like, as the first group talked about, educators who are also sitting in front of libraries using their Wi-Fi or in front of Taco Bell because they also don't have broadband at home. So clearly taken and noted for the record that we also have to understand the broadband disparities that actually exist among tech startups who may be great in the ideation phase, but may not have the tools that they need to actually be successful. Well, thank you very much to this group. We'll also hold off on questions to get to the final presentation and then just open it up to general questions for our subgroup. Dr. Johnson, you're up next on supplier diversity. I know he was here.
There you go.
Okay. I've been seeing you all day.
I know, you've been seeing me all day. So thank you very much, Nicole. And first of all, I'd like to thank the other members of my little group, Maria and Sean, for their work and their support of what we're trying to do collectively. I think for those who don't know you as well as I do, Nicole, but certainly your journey from the Joint Center to MMTC and now at the Brookings, you just continue to be a compelling articulator of America's human condition. And for that, we are so appreciative. And you just continue to demonstrate just great proclivity for finding the truth in all matters. And I think for all of us in this field, we so much appreciate your ability to do that and your willingness to sacrifice so much to provide these understandings to the conversation. So I just want to tell you thank you for that. So could you put up the first slide, please?
Hold on, we had a little technical issue.
Okay.
It's only our group. It was only our group. I'm just checking on
I know, it's okay.
Diversity slides.
Well, if you like to save time, I can start chatting if you want me to.
Yeah, why don't you start? I'm gonna look for a little chat note from Jamila or Jeff to just let us know if we're good to go.
Okay. So we have some general comments that I'd like to share. I mean, supply diversity and workforce diversity, as all of you know, are essentially foundational pillars to a robust and thriving economy and where everyone is a stakeholder. And so while diversity and equity and inclusion, and we call it DEI, has its aegis in companies' workforces, it certainly does not end there. We found that it is accepted industry norms that DE&I must extend far beyond a company's workforce. and necessarily applies to companies that utilize a full array of suppliers that provide telecom products and services in our industry and even in other industries as well. And so we know that there is great corporate value in this adoptive approach. Industry shows that companies increase stockholder value and profitability when their workforce is diverse, from entry-level positions to the C-suites and even to the boardrooms. And so likewise, we believe that a business benefits when its leadership embraces and ensures programs that fully utilize suppliers that are minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned, Native American-owned, and other protected classes as well, and including small businesses. So our initial research also shows that successful companies tend to ensure that their vendors and partners reflect a diverse workforce with their consumers and in the communities that they serve. This is extremely important to the success of these companies. But we also believe that all small businesses suppliers should be every bit as important to a company's DE&I strategy as the large businesses. And in most cases, we found that that certainly is true. For example, many of our association members in WIA, large and small, have robust and successful diversity and inclusion programs, including diversity supplier initiatives. And as you all probably know, several of our members are members of the $1 Billion Supply Diversity Roundtable. But at the same time, I think if we juxtapose the pent-up demand for 5G and the innovation that it brings in light of COVID-19 and the current social landscape that you've so articulated earlier in your comments, it is even more important that all of us, all of the nation's businesses and educational resources, HBCUs, that Dr. Fallon works with, and HSIs, Native American institutions, are utilized to the fullest extent. And by some examples, we will show some cases, factually and anecdotally, where effective adoption, diversity adoption, is a very invaluable and indispensable tool in this process. Next slide, please. So where are we right now? To date, our subgroup continues to build on the ideas and insights from the 2019 Diversity Best Practices Report. This is a cornerstone of our work that we're doing currently, and certainly we rely on that and the processes that that enable us to put that report together last year. And we will continue to engage in data research and reviews and outreach processes. In that regard, we had a wonderful, informative conversation with the Office of Communications Business Opportunities at the FCC, led by Attorney Sanford Wims. We received invaluable information from him and directions and insights on how the FCC operates. And some of that information was so very, very helpful as we look at other indices that will get us to the end of our report. We've also met with 3 large tech companies about their diversity supplier practices and products. There are others that we are planned to have conversation with later on this year. And in addition to all of that, we're assisting in planning a half-day event for October the 23rd, the Tech Showcase, as it is so well designed and called. And so we look forward to being a part of that and bringing some of our research to that discussion as well. Next slide, please. So major next steps and what is really going to drive our research going forward. I mean, we know that there is just a plethora of data. And so our challenge is to try to identify the types of data sets that do exist and to find ways to amplify the business case for supply diversity programs as it relates to opportunities in not only expanding technologies, emerging technologies, but in current technologies that we're going through right now. There are opportunities there, and we intend to do a deep dive into some of that data to ascertain what some of the major players in this area are doing right now. In addition, we will examine, current data resources, and we want to look at what types of companies within the media and tech and telecommunications and broadband industry sectors look at the ones that have supply diversity programs, gain some information about these programs and their best practices. And just as importantly, and Dr. Lee mentioned this, to flush out opportunities that exist in a COVID environment. And this way, hopefully, we'll be able to put out data that better supports women-owned and minority-owned and small businesses. I mean, for example, who would have known how urgent it is to have broadband driven tools for in-home learning, or the great need for PPE in such large amounts, or the demand for in-premise to the premise deliveries. These are just some examples of opportunities that flow out of the COVID environment. So in collaboration with our other ACDD partners, we will identify what additional types of data would be useful in decision-making in media and telecom and broadband that will spur more robust diversity relationships with diverse suppliers and entrepreneurs, particularly as it relates to the procurement process and a broad range of services that we will begin to identify as our report continues. And finally, we will continue to collaborate with our other ACDD working group partners, try to synchronize our research and efforts so to keep duplication to a minimum. We intend to analyze and design workable recommendations for effective best practices so that we can report all of that out in our final report up to you, Dr. Lee, and on to those who are leading our organizational programs and objectives here. So that's essentially where we are and where we tend to go. I will say that this is very exciting work, and I am personally committed to it, having been an infrastructure business owner for many years and understand very clearly the impediments and how doors sometimes are not open to disadvantaged businesses that want to participate in our telecom industry. So we want to stay objective about this, be open-minded about this, and we look forward to submitting our final report next spring. So if there are any other questions or comments from other members of my group, Maria or Sean, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Lee.
Nicole, I think you're muted.
Oh, that would help. It's like Maria or Sean, do you have any input if you are on part of the call? Okay, I'll ask those working group members who would like to turn on their cameras to entertain any questions from the broad committee. Please do so now. Dr. Wilson, I know Clint wants to show his face. Rashidi was kind of hiding. And Rosa was kind of hiding. Marita, I know you're there. If you all wouldn't mind turning on your cameras if you were willing and able to. And then at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the distinguished members of the broad working group or the broad committee to ask any questions around the three presentations that you've heard. One is around workforce diversity with paying particular attention on the pipeline. The second one is on startup entrepreneurs with particular attention on the type of investments, as well as the questions and concerns that these groups have as we try to think about ways to support them, both from a policy perspective as well as a programmatic perspective. And the last report that we heard from Dr. Ron Johnson, whose group also included Maria Brennan, Sean Perriman, is around, really delving into the type of supplier diversity research that is necessary to ensure that we have some resiliency of these organizations and these programs going forward. Is there anyone from the general working group that would like to ask a question of this group? I knew there was going to be one. I know it's late in the day, but Rudy was going to ask a question. Go ahead, Rudy.
First of all, fabulous presentation all around. Really impressive. I just wanted to actually, it's more of a bit of announcement, somewhat self-serving, which shouldn't be entirely surprising. But that's around the pipeline program. There is, I think is extremely important. The FCC is tackling it to a certain extent. You're looking at it as well. I wanted to mention at least the Federal Communications Bar Association is also trying to deal with this issue, building on programs that MMTC has had for years as far as developing pipeline programs for diverse, primarily, Black American law students to get them into legal internships at the FCC, the FTC, Department of Homeland Security. These are agencies that people generally don't think about, but also into corporate positions as well, and in civil society. So through the Federal Communications Bar Association, we're developing a diversity pipeline program. So just wanted to at least mention that. I know you have a program coming up in January, which is great timing, because I think that'll be a great time for us to really display the full spectrum of programs that we're trying to stand up from an organizational standpoint. These are programs that need to have some level of kind of, a foundational standing in order for them to be truly viable long term. So it's important to promote that, especially during these times where students across the board will need to be incredibly creative as far as how they reach out, develop their networks. And as we know, to your point, when white America catches a cold, Black America catches a flu, what happens in a pandemic? That means there's the increasing number of people from diverse backgrounds who die, right? Because we know that's the extent of how much greater it is as far as the detrimental impact on diverse communities. So congratulations, great work. And I can't count the number of doctors you have on your within your group, but you guys really packed a heavy punch here. That was a fabulous set of presentations.
Yeah, I mean, this is my kind of crowd. Doctor. I would actually also point out, Janelle Trigg did ask a question in the chat. The workshop, just for clarification, is January 15th, 2021. So for those of you that had questions about that, that is a January 15th deliverable. Marie Nicole Lee, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to commend the supplier diversity presentation and MMTC's chair, Dr. Ronald Johnson. He knows that this is an area that's very near and dear to our hearts as an organization. And I also I love the way that we're integrating all of the different ways that entrepreneurs can get involved in this business. One of MMTC's former board members, the late Herbert Wilkins of CENTCOM, was just amazing in terms of helping us to understand how supplier diversity is really an excellent opportunity for minority entrepreneurs to be able to exist and survive. And in fact, when his group that bought into Iridium Satellite and bought them from Motorola out of bankruptcy, he said that the only way that they were able to pull that off was because of procurement, federal contracts that the company continued to have to support its operations, while the management team took the company out of bankruptcy and took it to the next level. So this is invaluable information that we've provided today, and I appreciate in particular the presentation on supplier diversity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Any other questions? Susan, you have it? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Glenn. I'm sorry.
Marita, one day I will tell you about how that deal came about, and it would not have come about without an African American chairman of the FCC.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear that. We're going to let you tell that story.
Susan Allen, you have a question you want to ask too?
I have a more of a suggestion or prediction of what's going to happen. As you know, that in my daily work, and I don't sleep at all, as my working group knows, all those emails you get from 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning show that this is my real life. I have been, again, walking around the country, so to speak, and talk to corporation, government, from federal, state to local, and large more as businesses. And I know that because of COVID-19 and many of the corporations who have been, and we're talking about the technology field, right? Even though we have the application and the technology, we still need people to do the work, the data entry, the programming, and all that. For a long time, much of this has been outsourced to outside of the country. right? At the beginning, it started with the call centers, the 1-800 number. I will hear somebody with an accent, and I say, "Where are you calling from?" My bank. But then they're calling me from the Caribbean or from the Philippines or India, so they don't even know the culture here, and yet they're trying to take care of my account. And now we have a technology, staff augmentation work has substantially, a lot of them have been outsourced to Asia. With the last few years, with the Trump administration, things were coming back. But I hear definitely major corporations are going to consolidate their contracts and send them out offshore again. And that means there may be much less work to be done for American workers here at home. I think that we ought to, as Americans, in particular starting with this committee, where we're talking about technology, telecommunication, and the new technological advances, which is going to take us to the next century, we got to pay attention to what we heard today and figure out how can we bring the corporations, people truly to the table. I say this, we are working with a federal agency, we're a federal advisory committee, and major corporations are big contractors to our federal government. And they have a requirement to share the wealth and opportunity with the small business community. Under the Small Business Act, small business means any business with less than 500 employees, but that's not only that, but Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, women, people with disabilities and all that. We got to say small business in that one breath and say, corporation, you want to lease your car to the federal government, and there's lots of money to be in there. You have to make sure that you're transparent in your process, in your procurement process. Tell us who you are subcontracting your opportunities to. Are they coming down to the towns and villages where we are working with people like who we are talking about today? Only in that way can we make it meaningful. Otherwise, it's just lip service, folks. The big dollar is up there where the corporation is dealing with the government. The corporation then takes some of the work and outsource them outside of the country. It's happening. Some of the corporations are telling me that, look, we're going to cut our spending by 40% in staff augmentation, but we want to fill our diversity spend. How can you help us? Because we want to be able to fill that percentage of spend that we spend on minority community. Where can you get me suppliers who can do the other work? That's the opportunities for us here. But we can bring all the minority and diverse supply we can to the table. But if corporations just take a look at us and walk away, we'll fail.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Susan. That is right on point in terms of, I think, what Dr. Johnson, Maria, as well as Sean wanted to put together, which is to guide some framing of the research on what that looks like. So we see it as a great complement to the work of the previous other subgroup, which is also trying to put out some more pragmatic solutions. So thank you for that commentary. Very, very important. I've got two people with their hands raised. Heather Gates, you have your hand up.
Yes, I really don't want to talk after Susan.
I know, right? Oh, no. We're saying amen. We're just kind of like drop the mic and end the meeting right now, okay? Next time I put a zipper on my lips, okay? I'll zip them up.
It's a great compliment to you and being able to define the problem. But I really just want to start off by applauding the whole working group for the great work that you've done in identifying what we need to do. And, you know, I'm often in the digital inclusion world dealing with infrastructure and adoption, but I have a real big passion for entrepreneurship and diversity in tech because I believe that is we have to work on both sides of the issue. It's addressing the basics, and then what if they're connected? Can we empower them? Can we give them a path to the future? One of the things that I wanted to ask, I don't know which one of the working groups can address this, but in terms of, let's talk about the kids for a second, growing up in this world of social media, where some of these kids are really becoming entrepreneurs, using social media for entrepreneurship. Not only do they create their own businesses, but they're becoming employers at tender ages, creating whole infrastructures with employees and assistants in offices. So I'm wondering how you see that in the big scheme of what diversity in tech looks like today, especially with those pretty powerful millionaires right now on social media.
Yeah. Fallon, you want to talk about that? Or want to just do a quick response? Because, you know, we started early and I don't want us to end late. So if you don't mind, Fallon, can you give a quick commentary and potentially parking lot this as one of your group takeaways? Thank you, Heather, for the question.
Okay, I'll make it very, very quick. I feel like I'm my mother's age now, and I'm gonna give a mother's age comment to it. You're right, there are amazing youth of color who are becoming like social media influencers overnight, but it is not the norm, right? And it's not the norm to all the amazing work that you're doing, right? Because to be able to have a TikTok, something to go viral, you have to be online consistently. And we know that often our students don't have consistent access. I do think don't get me wrong, I think it's an amazing space to begin having a conversation about media influence and building a media company from your brand. And I know Marita and all the other folks who work in those spaces would love that. But I would always fall back to say that I don't hold it up as a norm, as a possibility, because there's so much infrastructure that we have to build around that to make that viable. So I'm a parking lot there, Nicole.
But I think, Heather, your point is well said and well taken, because if we're looking at digital divide issues that have been exacerbated, but these digital opportunities that are being created by the conditions that we have to all live under, the question becomes, do we not take into consideration that there are going to have to be alternative strategies for how young people of color get into this game? And so in the presence of strains on our educational system and where our kids stand today, in addition to where we are with regards to this digital new normal, we have to find a space where our young people can become creators of ideas and implementers of those, in which I'm hoping that the subcommittee will also be able to help us solve the disparities that exist in VC Capital, which I think could actually help with that.
And I would venture to say that is it. The issue is that we barely give money to tech startups that are adult run. We don't talk anything about youth entrepreneurship, and that's across race in this country. So I underscore you, Nicole.
Yes, yes. All right, I got one more question from Janelle Trigg. And Janelle, like I told Heather, we started early, but we don't want to end late. So Janelle, your question would be great.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. Great presentations, and there's so much synergy between our two working groups. So I'm looking forward to working with each one of your subgroups, because you lay a great foundation for the upcoming Opportunity Showcase in October, as well as the symposium in the spring. And I'd like to ask you to give us some statistics and information that we can also share within those two sessions, including you opening the second session to provide a great foundation for moving forward on diversity supplier programs. I wanted to highlight that we also have procurement opportunities we'll talk about. The chief person at the SBA will join us, as well as other procurement specialists. And there's another program for you as well as everyone else to keep their eye on. It's through the American Bar Association's Forum on Communications Law. It's a forum as part of the ABA. I happen to serve on its governing committee, and we have a major commitment for diversity, equity, and inclusion this year with participants, student participants in our diversity moot court, which we've held for 15 years, that will have a guaranteed summer intern or a job waiting for them if they participate. We are working with multiple groups in the communications and media space to provide the pipeline, to fill that pipeline as well. And we're also looking at partners. So I would love to have the ABA forum involved with your group and our group to find ways to promote that there are opportunities for young persons of color in the legal aspect of it, as well as business opportunities. So thank you for your leadership on this, and I look forward to working with you.
No, thank you, Janelle, and you are my mentor in many respects. So I appreciate that sharing of information. I believe that all of the groups, subgroups within our bigger working group have a lot of takeaways. And Susan, you got something else you want to say? All right, go ahead.
One parting thought. Okay.
No problem.
I am definitely a bit touched today when you all folks talk about black and brown. I'd like you to add Asian, and this is why. This is why, and I said it before, but not at a forum like this. Many people look at Asian Americans as look on the top 10% of them. Okay, they are up and come. They are good. They've made it, but many do not know Asian made 12.3% of Asian American at the bottom of the economic ladder. They have replaced African American as the most economically, racially divided ethnic group in America. So please include black, brown, and beige. All right, would you include beige? Because there are 12.3% at the very bottom. They are deep. They have different life than those top 10% that everybody think about when they think about the Asian Americans. They need help as well. And that is one of the things that I want to begin to talk about as well. So let's do that. B, black, brown, and beige.
But then there's some other complexions in there, Susan, that we cannot ignore. So maybe we'll go back.
As my Hispanic Chamber of Commerce brother Ramiro said, there are black, Hispanic, black, Asian, Hispanic, and the vice versa. There is a lot of interaction in between among all three of us.
But what you said is so important, and I beg my pardon as a researcher that's concerned with communities of color of not highlighting that, in addition to our friends who are in the LGBTQ community who also experience the intersectionalities of the quite inequalities that we're actually talking about today. I want to say this. Thank you, everybody from our subgroup, for stirring this type of productive conversation. I would just like to wrap up with a couple of things for all of you to take away and some just minor correction for those of you that are listening. First and foremost, in all of my years doing communication policy work, I've never seen conversations this depth as well as this vulnerable. And I say that as we all talk about COVID-19, particularly in our group, what added an additional layer of complexity to our work this year was the fact that we had to deal with the human experience of business owners, the human experience of people, the human experience of communities that are now under attack and assault due to this deadly pandemic. And so I think it makes our jobs as members even more important going forward. The second thing I'd like to say that came out of our group, which I was really excited about, given the scope of challenges, I'm very excited that our group has narrowed it down to specific things that we think we can solve. We are all under this this rush to actually deal with the urgency around the reversal of progress to our black, brown, beige, Native American, as well as, LGBTQ communities. And as a result of that, we've spoken a lot about this whole concept, as Susan has insinuated, Black Lives Matters. I would actually say that diverse suppliers matter, entrepreneurs matter, young people matter, businesses matter. We all matter when it comes to this debate, and this is why this committee matters even more. And so I think in our group, what we found extremely complicated was overlaying the human condition, but also recognizing the urgency, of which we are very thankful to the commission for rechartering this committee and allowing us to, one, put out a statement in response to the things around us, but giving us the opportunity to be around one another as professionals working in this space to feed off each other. And then finally, I would say this, and I'll close with something hopeful. Marita just reminded me of Herbert Wilkins, and when she said his name and where he stood in the broadcast community. And I would just like to say to the investment community, I would like to say to all of you, in the spirit of Henry Rivera and David Honig and others who have actually walked that path for a very long time, we're going to get there. And I think all of our committees are going to work with some level of decency as well as civility to make sure that that happens. And I would just like to say to everybody, in the spirit of what Marita reminded me of, it wasn't easy then, and it's not going to be easy now, particularly with these added trials of a virus as well as the racial inequity that's happening. So with that being said, Madam Chairwoman, I thank you. As Susan says, she don't sleep, and I definitely don't sleep. But we want to thank you for this opportunity to lead this charge. I want to thank all of our leaders in our subgroup for doing some great work over this period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. That was fantastic. I would say today has been fantastic. But I want to say thank you to Dr. Nicole, Rosa, Deborah, Marita, Rashidi, and Drs. Fallon and Johnson very much for an excellent discussion today and bringing high energy towards the end of our meeting. But all of you are examples of how lucky we are to have your considerable expertise and dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I just want to note that I think David Honig is suffering from being digitally invisible today. So I just want him to know I'm still thinking of him. Now, we've had a good discussion. Is there anybody from the full committee that wants to raise anything? We got, at this point, I don't think so, but okay. Thank you again to the members of the Diversity and Tech Sector Working Group. I also need to acknowledge for the record that Roy Litland and Brian Scarpelli are present today. We have had a few technical issues, so thank you for your patience with us. So now I would like to open the floor for comments from everybody on today or any issues you would like to raise before the advisory committee. If anybody has anything, please raise your hand. And while we're waiting, if members of the public have any questions, please send them to the mailbox, live questions at fcc.gov. That's live questions, all one word, at fcc.gov. Hearing nothing from the full committee. We do have a question from the public. Apologies, I gotta bring it up. The question is, this might be subjective, but this ACDDE appears to have more of an emphasis on holding events than the previous iteration did. Is this a strategic choice or something the committee decided on, or just a coincidence? Are events seen as an alternative or maybe more effective way to accomplish this committee's goals than recommendations to the FCC? I would say that we are doing more events. A lot of them are fact-finding. A lot of them have other goals as well. And this doesn't mean it's going to replace reports and recommendations to the full committee. So this is just part of our work. Part of what happened is that the pandemic has forced us indoors, and doing these events is a way for us to be able to gather together and gather information and get a lot done. So so I wouldn't say it's a deliberate change. It is just a part of our decision making, our review process, our learning process as we move forward with recommendations.
Madam Chairwoman, may I add one thing too, just for the question, if you don't mind? Nicole here. Just real quickly, I think to that question too, I think at least in our group, some of the fact finding may lead to resolutions to the FCC, given the fact that, again, the pandemic has made it a little bit harder to sort of gather the information and the research that we need. So to the person's question, it may end up, and so the public should look very closely at this process, particularly this year, that some of our groups may have these events that in and of themselves may actually land on pragmatic resolutions to go before the commission.
Exactly. You always say it so much better than I do. Raul, you had something you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you. It's not so much a question as it is an overall suggestion. I think this has been a wonderful meeting, and the infectious enthusiasm shown by everybody is really very amazing, and I'm very grateful to be part of this. I do have a suggestion for the November 6th symposium date. And I'm looking at this at 60,000 feet as a businessman. And I think, if I may pose a suggestion that you all can consider, I think it would be wonderful if at the beginning, at the symposium, at the very beginning, we take 15 minutes or 20 minutes to talk about something that we all mentioned in different ways, but I haven't heard it mentioned directly. And I apologize if that's because I haven't noticed it. And that would be to take 15 minutes at the beginning and just talk about the enormous economic clout that let's just say minorities have in this country today. I think it would be a wonderful juxtaposition for us to be able to start all of these things that we're talking about how to better include ourselves in the mainstream. If we were able to very, very quickly just talk about the GDP, the economic clout, the political clout, the enormous influence that we all have, African Americans, what was that? BBB, the black, the brown, and the beige, have in this country today. I think to start it all off with a statement of power, with a statement of real economic clout in this country, I just think it would be a wonderful way to start the rest of that day's symposium and recommendations as to how to proceed. I just think that it would make a very strong beginning statement for everyone that's there and the public that's there and the commission and everyone. I just would ask you to consider the possibility of that being added. I'm sure we can find a speaker or two that can talk about the enormous impact that we have in American society today, taken as a group. It's really amazing, the power that we have. And I think it's not a bad idea for us to be able to state it clearly at the beginning of something like this on that day. That's just what I wanted to suggest.
Susan, you're muted. You're still muted.
I agree because I thought I alluded to this, Raul, earlier, but I did not want to take too much of the committee's time. About 5 years ago, the census statistics was that just the three groups, African American, Hispanic, and Asian American together produce $1 trillion worth of GDP. Okay.
Yes.
That was 5 years ago. And this COVID-19 shutdown and social distancing show, as I said, I was looking for a place to have a bite before I went home. It was because the small business, which are mainly operated by minorities, are closed. And our inaction, inability to get out there and continue with our business, we meaning our community, has a major impact. And therefore, the economic impact cloud we have on the everyday life of Americans, even transportation, stores, and all that. You're right. To start that with a preamble type of introductory and say, this is why we are here. Pay attention to us.
Right. Exactly.
And in 2045, minority will become the majority. It's not a threat. We've got to say that in a way that's nice, so they do not feel that as a threat. But that's the way it is.
That's right. No, I agree with you. Not as a threat, as a fact. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's for consideration. Maybe the committee would think differently, but I think starting off with something like that would be very powerful if we had the right presentation, short and sweet, but something powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that, Raul.
Sure.
Any other comments or questions? I don't think we have any more questions from the public. Oh, wait a minute. Nope, we don't have anything else. All right, so we have reached the end of our very busy agenda today. Thank you again to everybody. Heather, is there anything do you have any last words with which you'd like to leave us?
Okay, y'all sit down. We have until 4, so. No, I just want to thank all the working groups for all the great work. we have 3 very important events coming up in the next less than 4 months time. So that's a lot of work. And so I appreciate all the sacrifices that you're all making with the kids at home and with everything coming. And also just a reminder that we're getting into the holiday period, which gets more challenging. So if we all can be mindful of the challenges of the December holidays and the complication of that, and then we're approaching the final phase of our tenure here, we want to make sure that we have those reports and recommendations ready in the next few months. So I'm excited to be part of this group, and what I heard today is very inspiring. And I'm not going to repeat everything that's been mentioned, but just a reminder that we're going to be busy for the next 3-4 months with all these events. And I encourage everybody to participate in other working groups events and offer your insights and inputs where you can. We're not in silos, as you heard today. But one more thing, I do want to, Nicole said something that really brought me back to Rudy's slide about dealing with humanity. What we're doing is really to have an impact on Rudy. And I believe one of Rudy's slides actually said that they were dealing with the human aspect of the digital divide. So I will definitely leave with that point that we are really, what we're doing is important because it's helping to address issues that affect people on everyday things. So I appreciate it. Thanks to you, Anna. Thanks to the 3 J's, as always, keeping us moving along. And thanks to the working groups for all the excellent work and the presentations today.
Thank you, Heather. Jamila, you have anything for us?
Yeah, thank you all so much. I am just always awestruck by this group. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just a team of all-stars. Everyone is just such an all-star in their respective area. So I will add my thanks and congratulations to a very successful, very impactful meeting today. And I know we had some technical glitches, but really it's not about how smooth or flawless the meeting is. It's really about the substance of what we're talking about. And I think that was clearly delivered today. So I don't want anyone to feel bad about any technical glitches that happened today. I think we hit a home run. We hit it out of the park. And we stated our intentions and we stated them clearly. So we're going to get the work done that we've all been dedicated to. And so I want to thank everyone. And so we know that we don't do this alone. So let me thank Anna, our fearless leader, and Heather Gate. We are so fortunate to have you all. And as has been mentioned by several members, you all don't just meet at this level, you meet with the chairs, and then you meet with the working groups, and then you also sit in on our subgroup meetings. And so if that's not dedication, I don't know what is. So we want to thank you all so much for what you're doing. We also want to thank our FCC Commission meeting room team, Jeff Reardon, Steve Balderson, and Gregory Huff. We certainly don't do any of this without you all, and you do it with such a collegial attitude of holding our hand through this new virtual environment that we're trying to navigate. We also want to thank Julie Saulnier and Jameel Cadre for their diligence. These meetings, as you can see, take a lot of work. And so we kind of lock arms and make sure that we all get it done. And lastly, we want to thank our Media Bureau and Commission leadership, Chairman Ajit Pai, for coming in this morning and getting us off to a really warm start. Our Media Bureau Chief, Michelle Carey, Sarah Whitesell, our Deputy Bureau Chief. She wasn't on camera, but I'm sure she was with us. And Brendan Holland, Chief of the Industry Analysis Division. They all look at everything that we produce. And so I just want to thank everyone for just a fantastic meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jameel. You're absolutely right. Thank you for everything you just said. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Second the motion.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks all.
Thank you.